Story 1. The Clockmaker's Gift. In the heart of a quiet European town, where cobblestone streets meandered beneath canopies of chestnut trees, and the air always seemed tinged with the faint aroma of old parchment and wood smoke, there stood a clock shop. Its windows were dusted with the gentle patina of time, and inside, hundreds of clocks ticked and chimed in an unhurried chorus, their hands sweeping gracefully across faces both grand and humble. Elias, the wandering monk, arrived one autumn afternoon as the sun was beginning its slow descent behind the rooftops. He paused outside the shop, listening to the soft symphony within, then entered, his steps barely disturbing the hush. The proprietor, an elderly man named Lucien, looked up from his workbench, spectacles perched precariously on his nose, his fingers stained with oil and age. "Welcome," Lucien greeted, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who had spent a lifetime tending to delicate things. "What brings you to my little world of time?" Elias smiled, his eyes reflecting the amber light that filled the room. "I have heard your clocks are the most patient in all the land. I wondered if you might share their secret." Lucien chuckled, gesturing for Elias to sit beside him. Around them, the clocks continued their endless dance, some ticking briskly, others marking the hours with stately chimes. On the wall hung a great-grandfather clock, its pendulum swinging with serene regularity, while nearby, a tiny porcelain watch ticked so softly it was almost inaudible. As they sat together, Lucien resumed his work, adjusting the gears of a stubborn mantel clock. His hands moved with careful precision, yet there was no urgency in his motions, only a steady, measured patience. Elias watched in silence, absorbing the rhythm of the place, the way time seemed to pool and eddy here, rather than rush forward. After a while, Lucien spoke again, his tone contemplative. "People come to me with broken clocks, always in a hurry. They want them fixed at once, as if time itself will stop for them. But these mechanisms are delicate. If I force the gears, if I rush the process, I only cause more harm. Each clock has its own pace, its own need for attention and care." He set down his tools and regarded Elias thoughtfully. "Life is much the same, isn't it? We push and pull, trying to make things happen on our schedule. But some things cannot be hurried." Elias nodded, feeling the truth of Lucien's words settle within him like a stone sinking into still water. He remembered a teaching of the Buddha. Patience is the highest ascetic practice. In that moment, the meaning unfolded before him, not as an abstract ideal, but as something living and breathing in the quiet of the clock shop. A bell above the door jingled, and a young woman entered, her brow furrowed with worry. She clutched a small pocket watch to her chest, its chain tangled, its face cracked. "Please," she pleaded, "can you fix this? It belonged to my father. I need it working by tomorrow." Lucien took the watch gently, examining it under the lamplight. "It will take time," he said softly. "The spring is wound too tight, and the glass must be replaced. If I rush, it may never run again." "But I have to catch a train," the woman insisted, her voice rising. "If I don't have it with me, I'll lose what little I have left of him." Elias watched her with compassion, recognizing the desperation in her eyes, the longing to hold on to something precious, the fear of losing even more. He turned to Lucien, asking quietly, "Is there nothing that can be done?" Lucien shook his head. "I can begin tonight, but it must rest between steps. The metal needs to cool after shaping. The glue must dry. The spring must unwind slowly. Time cannot be forced." The woman's shoulders slumped, tears glistening in her eyes. "Then it's hopeless." Elias rose and approached her, his presence gentle as a falling leaf. "May I tell you a story?" he asked. She nodded, wiping her cheeks. In a distant monastery, Elias began, there lived a novice monk who wished to attain enlightenment quickly. Every day, he meditated longer than anyone else, recited more prayers, fasted more strictly. Yet, the more he pushed himself, the more restless and anxious he became. One evening, the abbot found him weeping in the garden. "Why do you cry?" the abbot asked. The novice replied, "No matter how hard I try, I cannot reach peace. I am failing." The abbot smiled and pointed to a flower blooming by the path. "Do you see how it opens to the sun, not because it forces itself, but because it trusts the season? All things unfold in their own time. Your effort is noble, but true growth comes with patience and trust." Elias finished the story, letting the silence linger. The woman looked at her broken watch, then at Lucian, and finally at Elias. Her breath slowed, her hands unclenched. "Perhaps I can wait. Perhaps my father would want me to remember him with patience, not with haste." Lucian smiled, nodding approvingly. "Come back in 3 days. I promise I will care for it as if it were my own." She thanked them both and left, her steps lighter, her sorrow eased by the balm of understanding. When the shop was quiet again, Elias and Lucian sat together, listening to the layered ticking that filled the space. Outside, dusk deepened, and the world seemed to slow in harmony with the clocks. Elias spoke softly. "We live in an age that worships speed. We measure our worth by how much we accomplish, how quickly we move from one task to the next. But in our rush, we forget that some things, healing, forgiveness, love, cannot be hurried. They require the gentle patience of a clockmaker, the faith that time, given space, will mend what is broken." Lucian nodded, his gaze distant. "I have seen many people break themselves trying to outrun time. But those who learn to wait, to trust, find that life gives back in ways they could never have planned." Elias closed his eyes, breathing in the peace of the moment. He reflected on how often he too had struggled against the currents of life, wanting answers, healing, certainty, all at once. Yet here, among the clocks, he felt the wisdom of yielding, of allowing each moment to arrive and depart in its own rhythm. He turned to Lucian, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you for your gift. Not just the mending of clocks, but the reminder that patience is itself a form of love." As night fell, Elias stepped out into the cool air, the sound of the clocks echoing in his mind. He walked beneath the street lamps, each footstep a meditation, each breath a quiet surrender to the unfolding present. And so, dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, what in your life are you rushing? Where are you forcing the hands of the clock, desperate for resolution or change? Can you, like the clockmaker, offer yourself the gift of patience, a gentle trust that in time, all things will find their place? The Buddha once said, "Endurance is one of the most difficult disciplines, but it is to the one who endures that the final victory comes." As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and ask, what can I allow to unfold without hurry in the quiet chambers of my life? If this story touched you, I invite you to share your reflections below, to let others know they are not alone in their waiting. Like and subscribe for more stories of healing and wisdom with Elias. Until next time, may you find peace in the patient turning of your own inner clock. Story 2, The Bridge Beneath the Mist. In the early hours before dawn, when the world is neither night nor day, and silence holds its breath, Elias found himself walking along a winding country road. The air was cool and heavy with mist, curling in soft ribbons over fields and hedgerows, muffling every sound, except for the quiet crunch of gravel beneath his sandals. Somewhere in the distance, a river moved unseen, its voice hushed by the thick fog that had settled over the valley. Elias walked slowly, feeling the gentle dampness on his skin, savoring the mystery of the hidden landscape. Each step was an act of faith, for he could see only a few paces ahead. Yet he felt no fear, only a sense of anticipation, as if the world itself were pausing to listen. As the road curved downward, Elias saw the faint outline of a wooden bridge emerging from the mist. Its planks glistened with dew, and its rails faded into the white shroud beyond. At the foot of the bridge stood a solitary figure, a young man, shoulders hunched, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. He stared into the fog with a look of uncertainty, as if searching for something just out of reach. Elias approached quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. The young man glanced at him, eyes wide with worry. "Are you crossing?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Elias nodded. "If that is where the path leads." The young man hesitated, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I can't see what's on the other side. I know I have to cross, but what if the bridge isn't safe? What if it ends halfway, or the boards give way? I keep waiting for the mist to clear, but it never does." Elias regarded him gently, sensing the depth of his anxiety. He sat down on a mossy stone near the bridge and gestured for the young man to join him. For a while, they sat together in silence, listening to the muted rush of water below and the distant call of a waking bird. "Do you know," Elias began softly, "that many years ago there was a village on this very riverbank? Every morning, the villagers would cross this bridge to tend their fields, visit friends, or bring goods to market. Some days, the sun shone bright and the way was clear. Other days, like today, the mist was so thick you could barely see your own hand. But still, they crossed." The young man frowned. "Weren't they afraid?" "Of course," Elias replied, "but they learned something important, that the bridge was built strong, even if they couldn't always see it. And each step taken in trust revealed just enough of the path to go on." He paused, letting the story settle between them like the hush of the morning. Then he continued, "Let me tell you a story from my own journey. When I was younger, I traveled far from home, searching for meaning. One evening, I reached a wide river at dusk. There was a ferry, but the ferryman warned me that the crossing would be slow and the waters deep. 'You must trust the boat,' he said, 'and trust yourself to sit quietly, even when you cannot see the far shore.' At first, I was restless, craning my neck to peer through the gloom, anxious to arrive. But the more I struggled, the longer the journey seemed. Only when I surrendered to the rocking of the boat, breathing with the rhythm of the water, did I realize that each moment was its own destination. The far shore appeared not because I forced it, but because I allowed myself to move forward, one breath at a time." The young man listened intently, his posture relaxing as Elias spoke. The fog around them shifted, revealing glimpses of the river below, dark water flowing steadily, undisturbed by the uncertainty above. Elias turned to him. "What is it you fear will happen if you cross?" The young man hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "I'm supposed to start a new job today, in a town I've never seen. Everything in my life is changing, my work, my friends, even my home. I keep thinking, if only I could see further ahead, I'd know what to do, but all I see is mist." Elias nodded, understanding the ache of uncertainty. "We all wish for certainty," he said. "We want to see the whole path before we take the first step. But life rarely offers such clarity. The Buddha taught, 'All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence.' He did not say, 'Wait until you are sure.' He said, 'Step forward, mindfully, even when the future is hidden. He looked out over the bridge, the mist swirling like a living thing. Sometimes, the only way to know the strength of the bridge is to walk upon it. Each step reveals a little more, and in moving forward, we find our courage. The young man was silent for a long time, watching the pale light begin to seep through the fog. Finally, he asked, "But what if I make a mistake? What if I fall?" Elias smiled, his eyes kind. Mistakes are part of every journey. Even if you stumble, you learn the shape of the path. The bridge may sway, but it holds. And if you fall, there are always hands, seen and unseen, to help you rise again. He placed a reassuring hand on the young man's shoulder. You are not alone in your crossing. Every traveler faces the mist. The secret is not to wait for perfect clarity, but to trust the next step. A breeze stirred, thinning the fog just enough to reveal the first few planks of the bridge. The young man took a tentative step forward, then another, each movement steadier than the last. Elias walked beside him, matching his pace, their footsteps echoing softly in the morning hush. Halfway across, the mist parted briefly, unveiling the far bank bathed in gentle gold. The young man stopped, gazing at the view, his face alight with wonder and relief. "I never would have seen this if I'd stayed waiting," he whispered. Elias nodded. The beauty of the journey is often hidden until we commit to it. Life's gifts reveal themselves not to those who stand still, but to those who dare to walk into the unknown. They finished crossing together, stepping onto solid ground as the sun finally broke through, scattering the last wisps of mist. The young man turned to Elias, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "I think I can face what comes next." Elias bowed his head gently. "Remember, whenever you meet the mist again, and you will, trust the bridge beneath your feet. Trust yourself to walk, even when you cannot see the end." As the young man hurried toward his new beginning, Elias lingered on the riverbank, watching the lights play across the water. He reflected on how often he, too, had waited for certainty, only to discover that the path opened only with movement, not with hesitation. In the stillness, Elias offered a silent prayer for all travelers standing at the edge of their own bridges, hearts trembling before the unknown. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, ask yourself, where in your life are you waiting for the mist to clear before you act? What bridges lie before you, shrouded in uncertainty? Can you find the courage to take the next step, trusting that the path will reveal itself as you go? The Buddha once said, "Just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life." As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What is the next small step you can take, even if you cannot see the entire way? Story 3. The Whispering Library. In a quiet quarter of the old city, where ivy crept along weathered stone and the hush of centuries lingered in every alley, there stood a library unlike any other. Its doors were heavy oak, carved with swirling patterns that seemed to shift in the changing light. The townspeople called it the Whispering Library, for within its walls, silence was never empty. Books murmured softly from their shelves, parchment rustled like leaves in a gentle wind, and wisdom drifted through the air as naturally as dust motes in a sunbeam. Elias arrived one afternoon as rain tapped gently on the tiled roof, turning the streets into mirrors. He shook the droplets from his robe and entered, pausing just inside the threshold. The scent of old paper and polished wood wrapped around him, familiar and comforting. A few readers sat scattered among the tables, heads bowed over open volumes, lost in worlds beyond these walls. At the far end of the room, behind a desk piled high with books, sat Madame Rousseau, the librarian. Her hair was silver, her eyes sharp and kind. She looked up as Elias approached, recognition warming her features. "Ah, Master Elias," she greeted, her voice soft but clear. "What brings you to my sanctuary today?" Elias smiled, bowing his head in respect. "I come seeking a story, madam, not one written in ink, but one whispered by the heart." She regarded him thoughtfully, then gestured to a corner where a spiral staircase wound upward toward the stacks. "Go to the upper gallery," she said. "There is a book there that has waited many years for someone to listen." Elias thanked her and climbed the stairs, each step creaking beneath his weight. The gallery was dim, lit only by the pale glow of a stained glass window. Shelves stretched overhead, crowded with volumes bound in leather and cloth, their spines faded by time. As he walked, Elias let his fingers brush the books, feeling the pulse of stories longing to be heard. He stopped before a narrow shelf where a single book rested apart from the others. Its cover was plain, its title worn away. When Elias opened it, the pages fluttered as if sighing in relief. He settled onto a cushioned bench and began to read, though the words were faint and sometimes missing altogether. As he read, the library seemed to grow quieter still, until even the rain outside became a distant memory. The story told of a young scribe who had once worked in this very library, copying manuscripts late into the night. The scribe loved words, yet struggled with doubt. Each letter he wrote felt inadequate, each page unfinished. Fearing failure, he hid his work away, believing it unworthy of being seen. Years passed, and the scribe grew old. On his final day, he left his unfinished manuscript on the shelf, hoping that someday someone would find it and understand. The story ended not with triumph or despair, but with a simple wish. May my words bring comfort to another, even if I could not finish them myself. Elias closed the book, his heart heavy with empathy. He thought of all the voices lost to fear and self-doubt, all the stories never told because their authors believed they were not enough. In the hush of the gallery, he felt the presence of the scribe, a gentle yearning, a hope for connection that transcended time. He remained there for a long while, breathing in the silence, letting the story settle deep within him. Then, slowly, he descended the stairs and returned to Madame Rousseau's desk. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked. Elias nodded. "I found a story unfinished, yet more complete than many I have read. It reminded me how often we silence ourselves, afraid our truth is too small, too flawed to matter." Madame Rousseau smiled knowingly. "The library holds many such stories. Some are never checked out, some never finished. Yet each one adds to the great tapestry of wisdom. Even a whisper can echo for generations." A young man entered the library at that moment, his face drawn with worry. He approached the desk hesitantly, clutching a notebook to his chest. "Excuse me," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Do you have any books about finding your purpose? I feel so lost. Every time I try to write my own story, I get stuck. It seems everyone else knows exactly who they are meant to be, but I am just blank pages." Elias stepped forward, meeting the young man's anxious gaze. "Would you allow me to share something with you?" he asked gently. The young man nodded, and Elias led him to a quiet alcove lined with books. They sat together, surrounded by the soft rustle of pages and the steady heartbeat of the library. "There is a teaching in Buddhism," Elias began, "that says, do not underestimate the value of small things. A single candle can light 1,000 others, and its life will not be shortened. Sometimes we believe our story must be grand, our purpose obvious. But meaning is found in the act of living, in the courage to turn the next page, even when we do not know the ending. He paused, watching the young man absorb his words. Let me tell you a story I read today about a scribe who feared his work was incomplete. He left his manuscript unfinished, believing it would never matter. Yet here I am, touched by his words centuries later. His whisper reached me across time. The young man's eyes filled with tears. But what if I never find my purpose? What if my story ends before it begins? Elias placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Purpose is not a destination. It is woven from each moment you choose to show up, to write, to live. Even the smallest act of honesty, the simplest kindness, ripples outward in ways you may never see. Your story matters, not because it is perfect, but because it is yours. They sat in silence, listening to the library breathe around them. The young man opened his notebook, hands trembling, and wrote a single sentence. It was not profound or poetic, but it was true. And in that moment, it was enough. Elias rose, bowing to the young man. Trust your whisper. Let it join the chorus of voices that fill this world. You are not alone. As the rain eased and sunlight filtered through the windows, the library seemed to glow with new warmth. Readers turned pages, stories unfurled, and somewhere in the stacks, an unfinished manuscript whispered its gratitude. That evening, as Elias prepared to leave, Madame Rousseau pressed a slim volume into his hands. For your journey, she said. May it remind you that every story, however quiet, has a place in the world. Elias thanked her and stepped out into the damp, shining street. The city was alive with possibility, each window aglow with unseen lives and untold tales. He walked slowly, savoring the sense of connection that lingered like the aftertaste of a sweet fruit. Dear listener, as you close your eyes tonight, consider, what story within you waits to be told? What truth have you silenced, believing it too small or incomplete? Can you trust that your whisper, joined with others, becomes a song of healing for the world? The Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and ask, what small act of honesty, what quiet word can you offer tomorrow? Story 4. The Forgotten Lantern Festival. In a quiet valley, where gentle hills cradled a village older than memory, the arrival of spring was once celebrated with a festival of lanterns. Each year, as winter's last breath faded and wildflowers began to bloom along the riverbanks, the villagers would gather in the central square. There, beneath an ancient cherry tree whose blossoms drifted like pink snow, they crafted delicate paper lanterns. Red for joy, blue for hope, white for remembrance, and gold for gratitude. As dusk fell, every household would light their lanterns, releasing them into the night sky, watching as hundreds of tiny stars floated upward, carrying wishes and prayers into the dark. But years had passed since the last festival. The world beyond the valley had grown louder, faster, more demanding. New worries pressed upon the villagers: work, illness, the unending stream of news from faraway cities. The old rituals seemed quaint, unnecessary, even childish. One by one, families stopped gathering. The square grew silent, its stones cool and bare. Children who once danced with lanterns now hurried home after school, faces lit not by candlelight but by the pale glow of screens. Even the cherry tree, left untended, dropped its petals unnoticed. Elias arrived on a mild evening, just as twilight softened the world's edges. He walked slowly through the empty square, his sandals brushing against fallen petals that carpeted the ground in faded pink. In his heart, he carried a quiet longing, a wish to see the village remember what it had lost, to witness the rekindling of a tradition that once bound hearts together. He found an elderly woman sitting alone on a weathered bench beneath the cherry tree. Her name was Mireille, and her hair was white as moonlight. She gazed at the deserted square with eyes both sharp and sorrowful, hands folded neatly in her lap. When Elias approached, she looked up, her expression curious yet guarded. "You are not from here," she said gently, her voice edged with a faint accent. "No," Elias replied, settling beside her, "but I have come seeking light." Mireille's lips curled in a wistful smile. "There is little light left in this place. We used to celebrate the Lantern Festival, you know. My husband made lanterns for everyone. He believed each one carried our hopes to the stars. But people say they are too busy now, too tired. They have forgotten how to hope." For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the wind stirring the branches above. Then, from the folds of his bag, Elias drew out a small paper lantern, plain, unadorned, but sturdy. He held it out to Mireille. "Would you help me light this?" he asked. Her fingers trembled as she accepted the lantern. Together, they struck a match and coaxed a tiny flame to life. The lantern glowed softly, casting a warm circle of light around them. Mireille's eyes filled with tears. "My husband passed away 3 winters ago," she whispered. "I thought when he died, the festival would die too. No one wanted to make lanterns anymore. No one wanted to remember." Elias listened, honoring the ache in her voice. "Perhaps the stars are waiting still," he said quietly. "Perhaps all it takes is one lantern to remind us." As night deepened, footsteps approached, the hesitant tread of a child, drawn by curiosity. A boy named Luke, no more than 8, peered at the glowing lantern, his face alight with wonder. "What is that?" he asked, eyes wide. "It's a wish," Mireille replied, her voice trembling. "Would you like to make one?" Luke nodded eagerly. With Elias's guidance, he wrote a single word on the lantern: courage. Together, they released it into the night. The lantern rose slowly, buoyed by hope and warm air, drifting upward until it became a tiny star among many. Word spread quickly. One by one, villagers emerged from their homes, drawn by the sight of a lone lantern climbing the sky. Some came shyly, clutching memories. Others brought children, eager to share in something new, yet strangely familiar. Elias greeted each person with a gentle smile, offering blank lanterns and listening to their stories. A young woman wrote forgiveness on her lantern, tears streaming down her cheeks as she remembered a friend lost to anger. An old man chose gratitude, honoring the wife he missed every day. A teenager, restless and uncertain, scrawled belonging, hoping to find his place in the world. Others wrote words like healing, peace, or simply drew hearts and stars, trusting that the act itself would carry meaning. The square filled with people, laughter returning, soft at first, then swelling into joyful song. Lanterns multiplied, their colors painting the night with shimmering trails. The villagers rediscovered the simple beauty of coming together, of sharing burdens and dreams beneath the same sky. Some who had quarreled in the past stood side by side, surprised to find their old resentments dissolving in the shared act of creation. Elias moved quietly among them, tending flames, offering words of comfort, reminding each person that their light mattered. He told them a story from the Buddhist teachings. There was once a king who wished to illuminate his city for a great celebration. He ordered every household to bring a lamp to the palace courtyard. One man, believing his small lamp would make no difference, brought an empty vessel instead. But when the lamps were lit, the absence of his light left a shadow. The king noticed and said, "Even the smallest lamp brightens the darkness." never doubt the value of your own light." The villagers listened, their hearts opening to the truth of the tale. Each lantern released became an act of healing, not only for the one who set it free, but for all who watched its ascent. Old grievances softened, loneliness eased, and hope rekindled itself in the gentle company of others. The act of lighting and releasing a lantern became a meditation, a prayer, a silent promise to keep tending the flame within. When the last lantern floated skyward, the square glowed with warmth and memory. Morel stood beside Elias, her face radiant in the lantern light. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought our light was gone forever, but tonight I see it was only waiting to be remembered." Elias bowed his head, gratitude filling him. "Light never truly disappears," he said. "It waits within us, ready to shine again when we remember to tend its flame." As the villagers drifted home, Elias remained in the square, watching the lanterns fade into the distance. He reflected on the power of shared ritual, the way a simple act could bridge generations, heal wounds, and call forth hope from the ashes of forgetfulness. The cherry tree above him shivered in the breeze, scattering a fresh shower of petals over the stones, as if blessing the return of the festival. Later, as Elias wandered the quiet streets, he noticed windows aglow with candlelight. Families gathered at tables, telling stories, laughing, remembering. The festival had not ended with the night. It had awakened something deeper, a longing for connection that would ripple outward long after the lanterns had vanished from view. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, ask yourself, what rituals or traditions have you let slip away? What small act of remembrance might rekindle light in your own life or in the lives of those around you? Can you become the one who lights the first lantern, trusting that others will follow? The Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What light within you longs to be shared, however small or forgotten it may seem? May you carry the lantern of hope into every darkened corner, and may your light guide others home. Story 5. The Potter's Wheel. In a village where the river curved like a silver ribbon through fields of wild poppies, there lived a potter named Anouk. Her cottage stood at the edge of town, its windows glowing with golden light long after sunset. The shelves inside were lined with bowls and vases, teapots and cups, each one unique, each one shaped by her steady hands and quiet devotion. Elias arrived in this village on a late spring afternoon, when the air was sweet with the scent of blooming lilacs and the distant sound of children playing. He followed the path to Anouk's cottage, drawn by the rhythmic hum of her wheel spinning and the gentle clatter of clay being shaped. As he approached, he saw her through the open door, bent over her workbench, brow furrowed in concentration. He paused, watching as she pressed her thumbs into a lump of clay, coaxing it upward into the beginnings of a vase. But something in her movements betrayed frustration, a hesitancy, a tremor that marred the smoothness of her craft. With a sigh, she collapsed the clay back into a shapeless mound and started again. Elias stepped quietly inside, greeted by the earthy fragrance of wet clay and the warmth of the kiln. Anouk looked up, startled, then managed a tired smile. "Forgive me," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I didn't hear you come in." "There is nothing to forgive," Elias replied gently. "Your work is beautiful, even in its becoming." Anouk shook her head, gesturing to the ruined lump before her. "Not today. Nothing I make seems right. Every piece collapses or cracks. I try to fix my mistakes, but the more I force it, the worse it becomes." Elias settled onto a wooden stool beside her, folding his hands in his lap. For a moment, they sat in silence, listening to the soft ticking of the old clock on the wall and the distant song of birds outside. "Would you tell me," Elias asked softly, "why you began working with clay?" Anouk stared at her hands, stained and strong. "My mother was a potter. She taught me that clay remembers every touch, every joy, every sorrow. When I was young, I loved the feeling of the earth yielding beneath my fingers, the way something beautiful could emerge from mud. But lately, I feel trapped by my own expectations. I want each piece to be perfect, but all I see are flaws." Elias nodded, understanding the weight of perfectionism. "May I share a story with you?" he offered. She nodded, grateful for the pause. "In a distant monastery," Elias began, "there lived a monk who was tasked with tending the garden. Each morning he raked the gravel paths, removing every fallen leaf, striving for flawless order. But no matter how hard he worked, the wind would scatter new leaves across the stones. One day, the abbot watched him labor and said, 'Perfection is not the absence of mess, but the acceptance of change. Let the leaves fall. They too are part of the garden's beauty.'" Anouk listened, her breath slowing. "But what if my work isn't good enough? What if people see only the cracks?" Elias reached for a small bowl on the shelf, a simple thing, glazed in blue, with a hairline fracture running along its rim. "Do you know the Japanese art of kintsugi?" he asked. "When a bowl breaks, it is mended with gold, making the cracks part of its story. The flaw does not diminish its value. It makes it unique." He handed her the bowl, and she traced the golden seam with her finger. "I've heard of it, but I'm afraid to let my work be imperfect. If I show my failures, won't people judge me?" Elias smiled kindly. "All creation carries the imprint of its maker, their hopes, their fears, their humanity. To create is to risk being seen, to accept that some things will break, and that beauty often hides in the places we least expect." He gestured to the wheel. "May I watch you work?" Anouk hesitated, then placed a fresh lump of clay on the wheel. She pressed the pedal, and the wheel began to spin. Her hands moved with practiced grace, shaping the clay into a vessel. This time, when the walls wobbled, she did not rush to correct them. Instead, she breathed deeply, allowing the form to find its own balance. As the pot took shape, Elias spoke softly. "In Buddhist practice, we speak of non-attachment, not clinging to outcomes, not fearing imperfection. The Buddha taught, if you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will know complete peace. Creation is an act of letting go, of control, of fear, of self-doubt." The pot wobbled again, threatening to collapse. Anouk steadied it, but did not force it into symmetry. When she finished, the vessel was slightly uneven, its rim undulating like the hills beyond her window. She lifted it from the wheel, examining it with new eyes. "It's not perfect," she said quietly, "but it feels alive." Elias nodded. "So are we all, a little uneven, a little cracked, yet full of life." They spent the afternoon together, glazing pots and sharing stories. Anouk found herself laughing at her mistakes, seeing them not as failures but as invitations to explore. She remembered her mother's words, "Clay remembers every touch." Now she understood that it also remembers forgiveness. As dusk fell, villagers wandered by, drawn by the glow from Anouk's windows. She invited them in, offering tea in mismatched cups. Some admired her work. Others shared tales of their own failed projects and hidden dreams. The cottage filled with warmth and laughter, the air thick with the scent of earth and hope. Later, as the last guest departed, Anouk turned to Elias. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "I had forgotten why I began, to shape, to play, to discover. not to impress, but to express. Elias bowed his head. Every act of creation is a conversation between the hearts and the world. When we let go of perfection, we make space for wonder. That night, as Anu cleaned her tools and prepared for sleep, she placed the uneven pot on her windowsill. It caught the moonlight, casting a gentle shadow on the wall, a reminder that beauty lives in the spaces between our intentions and our acceptance. Dear listener, as you settle into rest tonight, consider, where in your life do you cling to perfection? What might happen if you allowed yourself to be a little uneven, a little unfinished? Can you trust that your cracks, your flaws, are not marks of failure, but signs of courage and growth? The Buddha taught, to understand everything is to forgive everything. As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What can you forgive in yourself tonight? What can you create, not in spite of your imperfections, but because of them? May you find peace in the shaping of your days, and may your life become a vessel for compassion, both for yourself and for the world. Story 6. The Silent Bell Tower. In the heart of a town cradled by rolling vineyards and ancient forests, there stood a bell tower older than any living memory. Its stones were worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. Its narrow windows framed the sky in shifting panels of light and shadow. For generations, the bell at its summit had marked the passage of time, calling villagers to worship, to celebration, to mourning. But for many years now, the bell had fallen silent. Its voice, once strong and clear, was lost to rust and neglect. Elias arrived as dusk settled over the rooftops, painting the world in hues of violet and gold. He wandered through the quiet streets, guided by the faint outline of the tower rising above the clustered houses. The air was cool, scented with lavender and distant wood smoke. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a nearby square, but the bell tower itself stood apart, wrapped in stillness. At the base of the tower, Elias found a small door, half hidden by ivy. He pushed it open and stepped inside, his footsteps echoing on the worn stone steps that spiraled upward into darkness. As he climbed, the sounds of the village faded, replaced by the hush of dust and memory. Near the top, Elias paused to catch his breath. A narrow window revealed the rooftops below, glowing softly in the last light of day. Beyond, fields stretched toward the horizon, dotted with sheep and wildflowers. Above him, the great bell hung motionless, its surface mottled with age. He was not alone. Sitting on a wooden bench beneath the bell was a woman, her posture straight but her gaze distant. Her name was Celeste, and she had tended the tower since childhood, following in the footsteps of her father and grandfather before her. She turned as Elias approached, her eyes reflecting both welcome and sorrow. "Are you here to see the bell?" she asked, quietly. Elias nodded, settling beside her. "I heard it once, long ago. Its sound carried across the valley like a blessing." Celeste smiled faintly. "It has been silent for many years. Some say the silence is a curse. Others believe it is simply forgotten. I come here each evening, hoping to remember what was lost." They sat together in the fading light, the silence between them deep and gentle. After a while, Celeste spoke again, her voice barely more than a whisper. "My son died 2 winters ago," she said. "He was just 16. Since then, I have found comfort only in this silence. The bell was meant to ring for him, but I could not bear the sound. So I let it rest." Elias listened, honoring the weight of her grief. He looked up at the bell, imagining the resonance trapped within its bronze walls, the songs of joy and sorrow, the echoes of lives intertwined. "There is a story," Elias began softly, "of a temple bell that rang only once each year, on the night of the full moon. The villagers believed its sound brought blessings to all who heard it. One year, a great storm struck and the bell cracked. Fearing bad luck, the villagers refused to repair it. For many seasons, the bell remained silent, and the people grew distant from one another, forgetting the rituals that once bound them. One night, an old monk climbed the tower and sat beside the broken bell. He did not try to fix it or force it to ring. Instead, he listened to the wind, to the rain, to the beating of his own heart. In that silence, he discovered a deeper music, the song of presence, of acceptance, of love that endures even when words fail. When the villagers joined him, they too learned to listen, not for the bell's voice, but for the healing that comes in stillness. Celeste closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. I miss him every day. Sometimes I think if the bell rang, I would hear his laughter again. Other times, I fear the sound would shatter me. Elias placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Grief is a silence we carry within us. It cannot be hurried or filled with noise. The Buddha taught, there is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path. Sometimes the path leads through quiet places, where healing grows slowly, like moss on stone. They sat together as darkness gathered, the world outside dissolving into shades of blue and silver. The bell above them remained still, yet its presence was palpable, a vessel for memories, for longing, for the possibility of peace. After a time, Celeste rose and crossed to the bell. She ran her fingers along its rim, tracing the names engraved there, generations of villagers, her own family among them. She turned to Elias, her voice steadier now. "Would you help me clean it?" she asked. "Not to ring it, but to honor what it has witnessed." Together, they worked in silence, wiping away dust and cobwebs, polishing the tarnished metal until it gleamed faintly in the moonlight. With each stroke, Celeste felt her burden lighten, her heart opening to the memories held within the bell's embrace. When they finished, they sat once more beneath the bell, breathing in the cool night air. Celeste spoke, her words slow and deliberate. "I thought the silence was empty, a sign of loss. But tonight, I feel something different, a fullness, a sense that my son's spirit lingers here, not in the ringing of the bell, but in the love that remains." Elias nodded, his eyes shining with compassion. Silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of listening. In your quiet vigil, you have kept the memory of your son alive, not through noise, but through devotion. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with pale gold, Celeste stood and touched the bell one last time. She smiled, her grief softened by gratitude. "Perhaps one day I will be ready to hear its voice again," she said. "But for now, I am content to listen to the silence." Elias bowed his head, honoring her journey. Together, they descended the spiral stairs, emerging into a world washed clean by morning light. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, what silences do you carry within you? Where have you mistaken quiet for emptiness, grief for abandonment? Can you find the courage to sit with your pain, to listen deeply, trusting that healing may arise not from filling the void, but from honoring it? The Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What needs to be heard in your silence? What gentle music might emerge if you allow yourself to listen? May you find solace in the quiet spaces of your life, and may the silent bells within you become vessels of remembrance, healing, and love. Story 7. The Stonemason's Path. The sun was still low when Elias set out along the winding path that climbed the hillside above the village. The air was cool and sweet, laced with the scent of wild thyme and the distant promise of rain. Below him, fields of barley shimmered in the morning light, and beyond them, the rooftops of the town glowed gold and rose beneath a sky just beginning to awaken. Elias walked slowly, savoring the hush of early day. As he rounded a bend, he heard the rhythmic sound of stone striking stone, a steady, purposeful music that seemed to pulse from the earth itself. Following the sound, he came upon a man working by the side of the path. He was broad-shouldered and strong, his hands thick with calluses, his brow beaded with sweat despite the coolness of the hour. Beside him lay a pile of rough-hewn stones, and before him stretched a stairway, each step carefully shaped and fitted into the hillside, forming a path that wound upward toward the forested crest. The stonemason paused as Elias approached, straightening and wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "Good morning," Elias greeted, his voice gentle. The stonemason nodded, offering a shy smile. "Morning, traveler. The path is steep, but these steps will make it easier for those who follow." Elias admired the work, the careful placement of each stone, the way the steps curved with the land rather than cutting through it. "You build with great care," he observed. The stonemason shrugged, looking down at his hands. "I suppose I do. My father built the first part of this path, and his father before him. Each generation adds a little more. Some days it feels endless. Sometimes I wonder if anyone notices, or if my work will ever be finished." Elias sat on a nearby rock, watching as the man selected another stone and began to shape it with measured blows. Chips flew, dust rising in the golden light. There was a rhythm to his labor, a patience, a devotion that spoke of something deeper than mere duty. "May I share a story?" Elias asked after a time. The stonemason paused, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Please." "In a distant land," Elias began, "there was a temple perched atop a mountain. To reach it, pilgrims had to climb a long and treacherous path. Many turned back, daunted by the journey. One day, a monk began to lay stones along the way, shaping steps where the ground was steepest, clearing brambles, mending what others had left broken. He worked alone, year after year, often unnoticed by those who passed by. One evening, an old woman reached the summit and found the monk resting. She thanked him for the path, saying, "Without your steps, I could never have made this journey." The monk smiled and replied, "I did not build the path for myself, but for all who come after. Each stone is a prayer, each step a gift to those I may never meet." The stonemason listened, his hands still. "It's easy to forget that when you're tired and the work seems endless." Elias nodded. "We all wish to see the fruits of our labor, to know that our efforts matter. But sometimes the greatest gifts are those we give without expectation. Work done in silence, kindness offered to strangers, paths cleared for feet we will never see." A soft breeze stirred the leaves overhead. The stonemason picked up another stone, turning it over in his hands. "Some days I feel proud of what I've built. Other days I see only how much remains undone. There are times I want to walk away, to let someone else finish." Elias smiled gently. In Buddhist practice, we speak of right effort, not striving for perfection, but dedicating ourselves to the task at hand, moment by moment. The Buddha taught, just as a solid rock is not shaken by the wind, so the wise are not moved by praise or blame. When we act with mindfulness and compassion, our work becomes its own reward. They worked together for a while, Elias handing stones, the stonemason fitting them into place. With each step completed, the path grew a little longer, a little smoother. Birds sang in the trees above, and the world felt quietly alive. As the sun climbed higher, a group of villagers appeared below, climbing the new steps with laughter and ease. An elderly woman paused beside the stonemason, thanking him for making her daily walk possible. A child skipped ahead, marveling at the view. The stonemason watched them, a quiet pride blooming in his chest. He turned to Elias, voice softer now. Maybe the path is never truly finished. Maybe it's enough to know that I've made it a little better, a little safer for those who come after. Elias nodded. Every stone you lay is an act of love. Even if no one remembers your name, your kindness endures in every step taken, every burden eased. They rested in the shade, sharing bread and water. The stonemason spoke of his family, of the stories passed down through generations, the joys and sorrows etched into the very stones they shaped. Elias listened, honoring the legacy woven into the path beneath their feet. As afternoon faded, Elias prepared to continue his journey. He stood at the base of the new steps, looking up at the path winding into the trees. "Thank you," he said, bowing to the stonemason. "Your work is a blessing, even if it is unseen." The stonemason smiled, lifting his hammer in salute. "Safe travels, friend. May your path be smooth." Elias climbed the steps, feeling the strength of each stone, the care embedded in every curve. At the crest, he paused to look back. The stonemason was already at work again, shaping another stone, adding to the legacy of those who had come before. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, what paths are you building in your life? Where do your efforts go unseen, your kindness unacknowledged? Can you find meaning in the work itself, trusting that every small act shapes the world for those who follow? The Buddha taught, drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise man, gathering it little by little, fills himself with good. As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What small stone can you lay tomorrow? What kindness can you offer, knowing that your path is part of a greater journey? May you walk with patience and purpose, and may your footsteps leave blessings for generations yet to come. Story 8. The Glassblower's Breath. The village of Saint Laurent was famous for its glass. At sunrise, the rooftop shimmered with light reflected from windows and lanterns, each pane crafted by the hands of generations. The heart of this artistry was a workshop at the edge of town, where the river bent in a lazy arc and reeds whispered secrets to the wind. Here, beneath a roof blackened by years of kiln smoke, lived Julian the glassblower. Elias arrived on a morning thick with fog, the air cool and pearly as he followed the river's curve toward the workshop. He paused outside, listening to the faint whoosh of bellows and the tap-tap of metal tools. Through the open door, he saw Julian hunched over his bench, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill. The furnace glowed like a small sun, casting flickering shadows across the cluttered room. Julian was shaping a vase, his breath steady as he blew into the long iron pipe. The molten glass swelled, trembling at the end of the rod, a glowing orb suspended between creation and collapse. Elias watched as Julian spun the pipe, guiding the form with practiced hands. But something was wrong. A tiny crack appeared along the surface, spreading like a spider's web. With a frustrated sigh, Julian set the piece aside, letting it cool among other failed attempts. Elias stepped inside, greeted by the mingled scents of hot sand, ash, and sweat. Julian looked up, his face etched with fatigue and disappointment. "Good morning," Elias said softly. Julian nodded, wiping his brow. "If you've come to order glass, I'm afraid you'll have to wait. Nothing I make today survives the fire." Elias smiled gently. "I did not come to buy, but to watch and learn. May I sit?" Julian gestured to a stool near the workbench. For a while, they sat in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the furnace and the occasional clink of discarded glass. Elias studied the pieces, Some warped, some shattered, others almost perfect except for a single flaw. After a time, Julian spoke, his voice low. "When I was young, my father taught me that glass is alive. It remembers every touch, every breath. If your mind wavers, if your hand trembles, the glass will show it. Lately, I can't seem to breathe right. My hands are steady, but my heart is anxious. Each time I try, the glass cracks. I fear I am losing my gift." Elias listened, sensing the heaviness behind the words. "Would you share what troubles your heart?" he asked. Julian hesitated, then nodded. "My wife is ill. The doctors say she may not recover. I spend my days here, trying to create beauty, but all I feel is fear. Fear that I will lose her, fear that nothing I make will matter. The more I worry, the more the glass betrays me." Elias placed a gentle hand on Julian's arm. "There is a story from the Buddha's life," he began, "about a musician who played the lute. When the strings were too tight, the music was harsh. When they were too loose, there was no sound at all. Only when the strings were tuned just right did the music flow. Our hearts are like those strings. When we are gripped by fear or anxiety, we become too tight, unable to create or love. When we give up, we become too loose, and our gifts fade. The middle way, the path of gentle presence, allows us to breathe, to create, to live." Julian stared into the fire, his shoulders slumping. "But how do I find that balance? How do I breathe when every breath feels heavy?" Elias rose and walked to the window, opening it wide. Cool air rushed in, swirling around the workshop. He motioned for Julian to join him. "Close your eyes," Elias instructed. "Feel the air enter your lungs. Let your breath be soft, unforced. Imagine each inhale as a gift, each exhale as a release. Do not try to control the breath. Simply allow it to move through you, like wind through reeds." Julian obeyed, standing quietly as the morning breeze brushed his face. Gradually, his breath slowed, deepened. The tension in his shoulders eased. "Now," Elias said, "return to your work. Let your breath guide your hands, not your fear." Julian approached the furnace, gathering a fresh blob of molten glass on his pipe. He turned it slowly, breathing in rhythm with the spinning form. This time, he did not force the shape, nor did he rush to correct imperfections. He simply breathed, allowing the glass to respond to his presence. The orb grew, shimmering with possibility. Julian shaped it gently, coaxing it into a delicate vase. There were still tiny bubbles within, a ripple along the rim, but the piece held together, fragile, luminous, alive. He set the vase aside to cool, turning to Elias with wonder in his eyes. "It's not perfect," he said, "but it survived." Elias smiled. "So do we all, cracked, imperfect, yet full of light. When we let go of fear, even for a moment, we make space for beauty to emerge." They spent the rest of the morning together, working side by side. Julian found himself laughing at his mistakes, seeing them not as failures but as part of the process. He told Elias stories of his childhood, of the first glass ornament he ever made, of the pride in his father's eyes. The workshop filled with warmth, not just from the furnace, but from the slow return of hope. As the day faded, Julian wrapped the new vase in cloth and handed it to Elias. "A gift," he said, "to remind you and me that even fragile things can endure." Elias accepted the vase with gratitude. "Thank you, Julian. Remember, the breath that shapes the glass also shapes the soul. Be gentle with yourself." That evening, as Elias walked along the riverbank, the sky ablaze with sunset, he reflected on the lesson of the glassblower's breath. He thought of all the ways people hold themselves too tightly, their lives cracking under the strain of fear and sorrow. He remembered the Buddha's teaching. Just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life. To live fully, one must learn to breathe, to trust, to release, to allow the world to move through them. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, where in your life are you holding too tightly? What fears keep you from breathing freely, from creating, from loving? Can you soften your grip, allowing each breath to carry away what no longer serves you? As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What beauty might emerge if you simply allowed yourself to breathe, to be present, to accept imperfection as part of your journey? May you find peace in the rhythm of your breath, and may your life shine with the quiet brilliance of glass shaped by gentle hands and an open heart. Story 9. The Lost Letter. The rain had been falling for days, soft and steady, soaking the cobblestones of the old city and painting every window with silver streaks. Elias walked beneath his hooded cloak, savoring the hush that rain brings, the way it muffles the world and draws people inward, into themselves and their memories. He passed narrow alleys where water pooled in ancient gutters and finally reached a small post office at the corner of Rue des Lilas. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp paper and ink. Shelves lined the walls, filled with parcels and envelopes from near and far. Behind the counter stood Madame Fournier, her gray hair pulled into a neat bun, spectacles perched on her nose as she sorted letters with practiced care. A young woman waited at the desk, clutching a faded blue envelope to her chest. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her posture tense, as if she were holding her breath. Elias stepped quietly inside, nodding a greeting to Madame Fournier, who smiled in recognition. The young woman did not notice him at first. She was too absorbed in her worry, turning the envelope over and over in her hands. "I've looked everywhere," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I left it here. It's the last letter my mother wrote before she died. I only wanted to mail it to myself so I could hold it again, but now it's gone." Madame Fournier offered gentle reassurances, promising to search every drawer and shelf. But the young woman shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "It's hopeless. I should never have let it out of my sight." Elias approached, his presence calm and unhurried. He knelt beside the young woman, meeting her gaze with quiet compassion. "May I sit with you?" he asked softly. She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make a scene." "There is nothing to apologize for," Elias replied. "Loss has a way of opening wounds we thought had healed." He sat beside her, listening to the rain tapping against the windows. For a while, they simply breathed together, letting the silence settle between them like a soft blanket. "Would you tell me about your mother?" Elias asked gently. The young woman hesitated, then nodded. "Her name was Camille. She loved to write letters, real ones, with ink and paper. When I moved away for university, she sent me a letter every week. After she died, I found this one among her things. I read it so many times, I nearly memorized it. I thought if I mailed it to myself, maybe I could feel close to her again. But now it's lost, and I feel empty." Elias listened, honoring the ache in her words. "There is a story from the Buddha's life," he began, "about a woman named Kisa Gautami. Her child died suddenly, and in her grief, she went from house to house, begging for medicine to bring him back. The Buddha told her to find a mustard seed from a home untouched by death. She searched, but every family had known loss. In time, she understood that suffering is part of life, and she learned to let go, not of love, but of the illusion that we can hold on forever." The young woman closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her face. "But how do I let go? How do I live without her voice?" Elias placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Letting go does not mean forgetting. It means making space for new ways to remember. Your mother's words are not lost. They live in your heart, in the choices you make, in the kindness you offer others. Sometimes, when we lose something precious, we discover a deeper connection that cannot be broken by time or distance. Madame Fournier returned, shaking her head apologetically. "I'm so sorry, my dear. We will keep looking, but perhaps the letter found its own journey." The young woman managed a small, sad smile. "Thank you." Elias rose and motioned for her to join him outside. The rain had eased to a mist, the city washed clean and shining. They walked together beneath the dripping eaves, past gardens lush with roses and lilacs. "Do you see these flowers?" Elias asked, pausing beside a cluster of blooms heavy with rain. "Each petal will fall, each blossom will fade. Yet the garden endures, season after season. Our lives are like this, filled with moments that pass, with beauty that cannot be held. But the memory of the flower, the scent of the rain, remains with us always." The young woman bent to touch a rose, her fingers lingering on the cool, wet petals. "I wish I could believe that." Elias smiled gently. Grief is not a problem to be solved, but a companion to be honored. The Buddha taught you only lose what you cling to. If you hold your sorrow too tightly, it becomes all you see. But if you open your heart, you may find that love returns in unexpected ways. They continued walking until they reached a small park where children splashed in puddles and an old man fed breadcrumbs to sparrows. The world felt softer, more forgiving, as if the rain had washed away some invisible barrier. Elias turned to the young woman. "What would you say to your mother if you could speak to her now?" She thought for a long moment, then whispered, "Thank you for loving me, for teaching me to write, for believing I could find my way." Elias nodded. "Then write her another letter, not to send, but to keep close. Let your words become a bridge between your hearts, a way to honor her memory and to carry her forward in your life." That evening, as the sky cleared and golden light spilled across the rooftops, the young woman sat at her desk, pen in hand. She wrote slowly, carefully, pouring her gratitude and longing onto the page. When she finished, she placed the letter in a small box with other keepsakes: a pressed flower, a photograph, a lock of hair. She felt lighter, as if some burden had lifted. Elias watched from afar, his heart full of quiet joy. He knew that loss would visit every life, but also that healing could be found in remembrance, in the willingness to let go of what cannot be kept, and to cherish what remains. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, what have you lost that still tugs at your heart? What memories do you hold so tightly that they become burdens rather than blessings? Can you find the courage to let go, not of love, but of sorrow, and to trust that what matters most will remain? As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What letter might you write, to yourself or to someone you miss, as an act of healing and remembrance? May you find peace in the letting go, and may your heart remain open to the gifts that loss can bring. Story 10. The Shepherd's Star. Night in the high pastures arrives softly, like a velvet curtain drawn across the world. Far from the city's glow, the sky above the mountains unfolded in endless darkness, pricked with stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. The grass whispered beneath a gentle wind, and sheep moved quietly, their bells chiming in the cool air. Elias found himself wandering these uplands one evening, his path lit only by the silver light of a waxing moon. He walked slowly, savoring the hush that settled over the land at dusk, the kind of silence that invites reflection, that makes every thought ring clear as a bell. As he crested a low ridge, he saw a solitary figure sitting on a flat stone, wrapped in a woolen cloak, gaze fixed upward. It was Matteo, the village shepherd, known for his gentle ways and the haunting songs he played on his wooden flute. Tonight, however, there was no music, only the stillness of the hills and the quiet company of stars. Elias approached, careful not to startle him. "Good evening, Matteo," Elias said softly. Matteo turned, his face lined with worry, eyes reflecting the starlight. "Good evening, Master Elias. Are you lost?" "Not tonight," Elias replied, settling beside him on the stone. "But perhaps I am searching, as we all are." Matteo managed a tired smile. "I suppose you're right. Sometimes I think the stars themselves are searching for something." They sat together in companionable silence, listening to the sheep crop the grass, the distant rush of a mountain stream. Above them, the Milky Way arched across the heavens, a river of light flowing through eternity. After a while, Elias spoke. "You seem troubled, Matteo. Would you share your thoughts?" Matteo hesitated, then sighed. "It's my son, Luca. He left for the city last spring, chasing dreams I don't understand. He writes less and less. I worry for him, alone among strangers. Some nights I wonder if I failed him, if I should have tried harder to keep him here, or taught him more before he went away." He looked up at the stars, voice thick with longing. "When I was a boy, my father taught me to find my way by the stars. Out here, they never change, but the world below is always shifting. I feel lost, Elias. I can guide my flock, but not my own child." Elias listened deeply, honoring the ache in Matteo's words. He watched the shepherd's hands, roughened by years of work, clench and unclench around his staff. "There is a story from the Buddha's life," Elias began, "about a man who sought guidance from the stars. He traveled far, hoping to find answers written in the sky. One night, exhausted and afraid, he lay down in a field and dreamed of a great tree, whose roots reached deep into the earth, whose branches touched the heavens. When he awoke, he realized that wisdom is not found by fleeing the world, nor by clinging to it, but by standing firmly where you are, rooted in love, reaching toward understanding." Matteo was silent, absorbing the tale. "But how do I know if I've done enough? How do I let go of this fear for my son?" Elias smiled gently. "A shepherd's task is to care for his flock, to guide and protect, but not to confine. Children, like sheep, must sometimes wander beyond our sight. Love does not end at the edge of the pasture. It travels with them, invisible as the wind, steady as the stars." He pointed upward, tracing a constellation with his finger. "Do you see that star just above the mountain? It's called the shepherd's star in some lands, Venus, shining brightest at dawn and dusk. For centuries, travelers have used it to find their way home. Your son may be far, but the love you gave him is a guiding light. Trust that, even when you cannot see him, he carries your teachings within him." Matteo's eyes filled with tears, though he did not look away from the sky. "I want to believe that, but some nights the distance feels too great." Elias placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "The Buddha taught, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Care for your own heart, Matteo. Trust that you have given your son what he needs. The rest is his journey." They sat in silence as the moon climbed higher, bathing the hills in pale light. A shooting star streaked across the sky, brief and brilliant. Matteo drew a shaky breath. "When Luca was small, we would lie in the grass and count the stars. He always believed there was one meant just for him, a sign that he belonged in the world. Maybe it's time I trust he's found it." Elias nodded. Letting go is not forgetting. It is loving without holding, blessing the road ahead even when it leads out of sight. As dawn neared, the first birds began to sing. Matteo rose, gathering his cloak around him. "Thank you, Elias. I will try to remember your words, and the shepherd's star." Elias smiled, watching as Matteo moved among his flock, calling each sheep by name. The valley glowed with new light, and the stars faded, but their memory lingered in the hush of morning. Later, as Elias made his way back to the village, he reflected on the lessons of the night. He thought of all those who watch and wait, hearts stretched between hope and fear. He remembered the Buddhist teaching. Just as a mother protects her child, her only child, with her life, even so should one cultivate boundless love toward all beings. To love is to risk, to trust, to release. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, who or what do you hold in your heart, longing to protect? Where do you struggle to let go, fearing loss or change? Can you trust that your love, like the shepherd's star, shines on even when unseen? As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What guiding light do you offer, and what light guides you in return? May you find peace in the constancy of love, and may your heart remain open to the journeys of those you cherish, wherever their paths may lead. Story 11. The Garden of Unfinished Songs. There was a garden on the edge of town, tucked behind a crumbling stone wall and a tangle of wild roses. In spring, it overflowed with color: tulips, violets, daffodils, and the pale green shoots of herbs. But what made this place truly special was not its flowers, nor even the ancient pear tree that shaded its heart, but the music that sometimes drifted over its beds, notes so gentle they seemed to rise from the earth itself. Elias discovered the garden one afternoon as he wandered through winding lanes, guided by the faint strains of a melody carried on the breeze. He paused at the gate, listening. The song was hesitant, stopping and starting, as if the musician could not decide how it should end. Curious, Elias pushed open the gate and stepped inside. Seated on a bench beneath the pear tree was a young woman named Sabine. Her hair was the color of chestnuts, her eyes deep and searching. She held a violin in her lap, bow poised above the strings, her face creased with concentration and frustration. Scattered around her feet were pages of sheet music, some covered in neat notation, others filled with crossings out and half-finished bars. Sabine looked up as Elias approached, her expression wary. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone." "You disturbed nothing," Elias replied, his voice warm. "Your music drew me here. May I listen?" She hesitated, then nodded, lowering her gaze. Elias sat quietly on the grass, folding his hands in his lap. Sabine lifted her violin and began to play again, a melody both beautiful and broken, pausing abruptly before each refrain, as if afraid to move forward. When she finished, silence settled over the garden, broken only by the buzz of bees and the distant call of a dove. Sabine set her violin aside, shoulders slumping. "It's no use," she murmured. "Every time I try to finish this piece, I lose my way. The ending never comes. My teacher says I lack discipline. My friends say I'm too sensitive. Maybe they're right." Elias regarded her gently. "May I ask why you wish to finish this song?" Sabine picked at a blade of grass, her fingers trembling. "It was meant for my father. He loved music more than anything. Before he died, he asked me to write something new, something that would remind people of hope. I promised him I would. But every time I get close, I hear his voice in my mind, and I freeze. I'm afraid I'll disappoint him, or myself." Elias listened deeply, honoring the weight of her longing and fear. "Would you like to hear a story?" he offered. Sabine nodded, wiping her eyes. In a monastery high in the mountains, Elias began, there lived a monk who spent his days copying sacred texts. One winter he grew ill and could not finish his work. Fearing he had failed his calling, he wept. The abbot came to him and said, "Do you see the snow outside? Each flake is unique, yet none is complete on its own. It is their coming together that blankets the earth in beauty. Your unfinished words are part of a greater song. Trust that what you have given is enough." Sabine was silent, letting the story settle within her. After a while, she spoke. "But what if the world needs more than I can give? What if my song is never heard?" Elias smiled softly. In Buddhist teaching, there is a saying, "Drop by drop, the water pot is filled." Every note you play, every line you write, adds to the well of beauty in the world. Completion is not always our task. Sometimes our role is simply to begin, to plant seeds, to sing the first verse, to trust that others will carry the melody onward. He glanced at the scattered sheets of music. What if you played your song as it is, unfinished? What if you allowed yourself to be present with the music, without forcing an ending? Sabine hesitated, then lifted her violin once more. This time, she played without looking at the pages, letting the melody wander where it wished. The notes rose and fell, looping back, drifting into silence, then returning. There was no resolution, only movement, like the wind through the garden or the river beyond the wall. As she played, birds gathered in the branches overhead, drawn by the gentle sound. A neighbor paused outside the gate, listening. Even the bees seemed to hum in harmony. When Sabine finally lowered her bow, her face was wet with tears, but her eyes shone with relief. "I felt free," she whispered. "For the first time, I wasn't trying to finish. I was just playing." Elias nodded. Creation is a living thing. When we cling to perfection, we strangle its breath. When we allow ourselves to be present, to accept incompletion, we make space for wonder. They sat together as the sun dipped lower, golden light filtering through the leaves. Sabine gathered her pages, smoothing them with careful hands. "Perhaps I will finish the song someday," she said. "Or perhaps someone else will. For now, I am grateful for what I have made." Elias smiled. "That is enough. The Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Let your peace be found in the act of creation, not in its conclusion." As evening fell, Sabine packed away her violin and walked with Elias to the gate. The garden glowed with twilight, alive with the promise of more songs yet to be sung. Later, as Elias wandered homeward, he reflected on the garden of unfinished songs, the beauty that arises when we release our grip on outcomes, when we trust the process rather than the product. He thought of all the dreams left incomplete, the stories half told, the melodies still searching for their endings. And he understood that in their very incompleteness, there was room for hope, for growth, for the unexpected grace of what might yet become. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, what songs in your life remain unfinished? Where do you judge yourself for not completing, not perfecting, not arriving? Can you allow yourself to be present with what is, trusting that your efforts, however incomplete, are already a gift? As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What would it feel like to honor your unfinished songs, not as failures, but as offerings to the world? May you find peace in the process, and may your life be a garden where beauty grows, even among the things left undone. Story 12. The Blacksmith's Ember. The village of Valmont, cradled by green hills and threaded with the laughter of a winding stream, was famous for its bridges and ironwork. At its edge stood a stone forge, its chimney always breathing out ribbons of smoke, its windows glowing long after sunset. This was the domain of Henri, the blacksmith, a man whose broad shoulders and thick arms spoke of decades spent at the anvil, shaping metal with fire and will. For over 30 years, Henri had been the heart of Valmont's industry. He crafted horseshoes that never slipped, hinges that never squeaked, gates that stood strong against every storm. His work was known for its strength and beauty, and people from neighboring villages often made the journey to commission his skill. Yet, as autumn's chill deepened and leaves fell in golden drifts, a heaviness settled over Henri's workshop, a fatigue that crept into his bones and dulled the once bright spark in his eyes. Elias arrived one afternoon, just as rain began to patter on the slate roof and dusk painted the world in blue and gray. He found Henri hunched over his anvil, sweat beading on his brow despite the cold. Sparks leapt with each blow of the hammer, but the rhythm was off, too hurried, too hard. In the corner, a pile of unfinished work grew larger by the day. Plowshares needing sharpening, railings waiting to be mended, tools left half-forged. Henri barely looked up when Elias entered, his voice gruff and tired. "If you're here for work, you'll have to wait. I'm behind on orders. There's no time for visitors." Elias smiled gently, unbothered by the brusque greeting. "I came not for iron, but for warmth. May I sit a while?" With a shrug, Henri gestured to a battered stool near the hearth. Elias settled in, letting the heat of the forge seep into his bones. For a while, he watched in silence as Henri worked, plunging hot metal into water, sending up clouds of steam, wrestling a stubborn gate hinge into shape only to toss it aside with a muttered curse. After a time, Elias spoke softly. "Your fire burns bright, but your spirit seems weary." Henri snorted, setting down his hammer. "Easy for you to say. You walk the world, free as the wind. I have a village depending on me. If I stop, the work piles up. People need their tools, their shoes, their gates. If I slow down, I'll fall behind, and then what am I worth?" Elias regarded him kindly. "May I ask, when did you last rest? Not just your body, but your heart." Henri shook his head, staring into the flames. "Rest is for those who can afford it. My father taught me that a blacksmith's duty is to serve. He worked until the day he died, hands burned and back bent. I thought if I kept going, I'd honor him. But lately, my hands ache. I wake up tired. I snap at my apprentice. Even the fire feels cold sometimes. I don't know what's wrong with me." Elias listened deeply, honoring the vulnerability beneath Henri's words. "There is a story from the Buddha's life," he began, "about a lamp that burned so brightly it lit the whole monastery. But the wick was never trimmed, the oil never replenished. One night, the flame sputtered and died, leaving the monks in darkness. The abbot said, 'A lamp must be tended if it is to give light. So too must we care for ourselves, lest our fire go out.'" Henri's jaw tightened. "It's different for you monks. You have no families to feed, no crops to tend, no deadlines to meet." Elias smiled. "On the contrary, the monastery depended on that lamp. We learned that true service is not self-sacrifice unto emptiness. It is balance, diving from fullness, not depletion. Even the Buddha rested beneath the Bodhi tree before enlightenment." He leaned forward, voice gentle. "What are you afraid will happen if you rest?" Henri hesitated, then spoke in a whisper, as if confessing a secret. "If I stop, maybe I won't start again. Maybe I'll realize I'm just tired, that I have nothing left. And if I'm not the blacksmith, who am I?" Elias placed a hand on Henri's arm, steady and warm. Fatigue is not failure. Even the strongest fire needs time to gather itself, to burn clean and bright. The Buddha taught, to keep the body in good health is a duty. Otherwise, we shall not be able to keep our mind strong and clear. Rest is not weakness, it is wisdom. And identity is not only forged in labor, but also in kindness to oneself. They sat together as the forge quieted, the last embers glowing softly in the gloom. Elias invited Henri to close his eyes, to feel the heat of the coals, the weight of his own breath. For a few minutes, they simply breathed, letting the tension drain away. Outside, the rain softened, and the sound of dripping water mingled with the heartbeat of the forge. When Henri opened his eyes, the world seemed softer, less urgent. I can't remember the last time I just sat. There's always something more to do. Elias nodded. Sometimes the hardest thing is to allow ourselves to pause. But in stillness, the ember is rekindled. When you rest, you honor all those who depend on your strength, not by burning yourself out, but by ensuring your fire endures. Henri rose and poured them each a mug of tea, hands steadier now. As they drank, he spoke of his childhood, of learning the trade from his father, of the pride he felt shaping something lasting from raw ore. He confessed his fears, of growing old, of being forgotten, of losing the purpose that had guided him all his life. Elias listened, honoring each word. Purpose is not a single flame, he said. It is a fire built from many sparks. Work, yes, but also friendship, rest, laughter, and forgiveness. When we tend all these embers, our light endures. And sometimes, the greatest gift we give others is the example of caring for ourselves. As dusk fell, Henri's apprentice arrived, surprised to find the forge quiet and his master sharing tea with a stranger. Henri greeted him with a rare smile, inviting him to join them. Together they talked and laughed, the warmth of the hearth spreading beyond the boundaries of work. The apprentice, seeing his master at ease, dared to share his own worries and dreams, and Henri listened, truly listened, for the first time in months. That night, after Elias departed, Henri lingered in the workshop. He banked the fire carefully, trimmed the wick of the old lantern, and allowed himself, for the first time in years, to sit in silence, feeling the glow of the embers within and around him. He realized that his worth was not measured by how much he produced, but by the care he gave to his craft, to his apprentice, and to himself. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, where in your life do you burn too brightly, giving until you are empty? What might happen if you allowed yourself to pause, to replenish, to honor your own needs as tenderly as you serve others? Can you see that your value lies not only in what you do, but in who you are when you let yourself rest? As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What ember within you longs to be tended, not with urgency, but with gentle care? What would it mean to nurture your own light, trusting that in doing so, you illuminate the path for others as well? May you find balance between effort and ease, and may your inner fire burn steady and bright, lighting the way for yourself and those you love. Story 13. The Market of Echoes. The village market awoke before dawn, its cobblestone square filling with the sounds and scents of life. Stalls appeared like mushrooms after rain, baskets of apples and pears, bolts of linen, wheels of cheese, jars of honey glinting gold in the first rays of sunlight. Voices rose and mingled, greetings, laughter, the calls of vendors hawking their wares, and the gentle bargaining that was as much ritual as necessity. Elias arrived as the sky blushed pink above the rooftops. He wandered through the bustle, pausing to admire a baker's warm loaves, a florist's wild bouquets, a potter's new blue-glazed bowls. The air was alive with possibility, but beneath the surface, Elias sensed something else, a tension, subtle but persistent, like a low note humming behind a song. Near the fountain at the center of the square, two women argued over a basket of figs. Their voices grew sharp, drawing curious glances from passers-by. At another stall, a farmer grumbled about unfair prices, his words carrying farther than he intended. Children chased each other between stalls, repeating snippets of adult conversation, sometimes playful, sometimes cruel. Elias stopped beside an old man who sold herbs and teas. The man's eyes were wise and kind, but today they were clouded with worry. "Good morning, Bernard," Elias greeted him. Bernard sighed. "Good morning, Master Elias. The market is lively, but not peaceful. Words fly faster than sparrows these days. Yesterday, a rumor started here. Someone said the baker was cheating his scales. By noon, everyone believed it. The poor man lost half his customers before anyone bothered to ask if it was true." Elias nodded, understanding. Words are powerful. Once spoken, they take on lives of their own. He thanked Bernard and continued through the market, listening more closely now, not just to what was said, but to how it moved. He noticed how gossip leapt from mouth to mouth, growing with each retelling. How praise could lift a vendor's spirits, while a careless insult lingered long after coins had changed hands. The market was not only a place of trade, but a place where stories and wounds were exchanged. As the morning wore on, Elias came upon a young woman named Leah sitting alone behind her stall of hand-woven baskets. Her eyes were red, her shoulders hunched. "May I sit with you?" Elias asked gently. She nodded, brushing away a tear. "It's nothing," she whispered. "Just people talk." Elias waited, patient as a stone. After a moment, Leah spoke again. "Someone said I copied my designs from another village, that I'm a thief. It isn't true, but now everyone looks at me differently. Even my friends avoid my stall. I feel invisible, or worse, stained." Elias listened deeply, honoring her pain. "Words can wound as surely as stones," he said, "but they can also heal. Would you like to hear a story?" Leah nodded, desperate for comfort. "In a small town," Elias began, "there lived a bell-maker whose bells were famed for their clear tone. One day, a stranger spread a rumor that the bell-maker used inferior metal. Though untrue, the story echoed through the town, and soon no one would buy his bells. The bell-maker grew bitter and silent. But one evening, a child wandered into his shop, asking to learn how to make a bell. The bell-maker agreed, teaching the child with patience and care. When the new bell rang out across the fields, its sound was so pure that people gathered to listen. They remembered the bell-maker's skill, and slowly trust returned. The echo of kindness overcame the echo of suspicion. Leah was quiet for a long time. But what if people never believe me? What if the echo of their words drowns out everything I do? Elias smiled softly. In Buddhist teaching, there is a saying, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." You cannot control what others say, but you can choose your own voice. Speak truth, act with integrity, and let your actions ring louder than rumors. Over time, the echo of kindness will find its way back to you. They sat together as the market ebbed and flowed around them. A little girl approached, clutching a coin and shyly asking to buy a basket. Leah smiled and helped her choose, her hand steady despite the ache in her heart. Later, Elias walked through the market, greeting vendors and customers alike. He praised the baker's bread, complimented the florist's roses, thanked the farmer for his sweet apples. Each kind word was a pebble dropped into the well of the market, sending ripples outward. He watched as others picked up the habit, one vendor defending another against gossip, a customer apologizing for harsh words, laughter returning where suspicion had taken root. By midday, the mood had shifted. The argument by the fountain faded into memory, replaced by the music of friendly chatter and honest trade. Bernard, the herb seller, caught Elias's eye and nodded in gratitude. As the sun reached its zenith, Elias gathered a group of children near the fountain. He knelt beside them, speaking softly. "Do you know how echoes work?" he asked. "When you shout into the hills, your voice returns to you, sometimes louder, sometimes softer. Words are like that. What we send out comes back. If we send anger, we receive anger. If we send kindness, we receive kindness. The market is a place of echoes. Choose what you wish to hear." The children listened wide-eyed, then ran off, their laughter ringing clear. That evening, as the market closed and vendors packed away their goods, Leah approached Elias. She pressed a small woven bracelet into his hand. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Today, I found my voice again." Elias smiled, slipping the bracelet onto his wrist. "Let your kindness be the loudest echo in this place." As twilight settled over the empty square, Elias reflected on the power of words, their ability to harm or to heal, to divide or to unite. He remembered the Buddhist teaching. Whatever words we utter should be chosen with care, for people will hear them and be influenced by them for good or ill. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, what echoes do your words create in the world? Where have you been wounded by speech, and where have you offered healing? Can you choose tomorrow to speak with intention, to let your voice become an echo of compassion? As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What word of kindness can you offer to yourself or another that might ripple outward and return to you in unexpected ways? May your words be seeds of peace, and may the echoes you send forth bring harmony to all who hear them. Story 14. The Window Without Curtains. In a narrow street lined with houses of faded brick and weathered shutters, there stood a home that was different from the rest. Its windows were bare. No curtains, no blinds, nothing to shield the inside from the world outside. At night, warm lamplight spilled out onto the cobblestones, and during the day, sunlight poured in unfiltered, illuminating every corner. This house belonged to Madame Lucille, an elderly woman known for her kindness and her habit of waving to anyone who passed by. Yet despite her open windows and welcoming smile, few people ever visited. Some whispered that she was lonely, others said she was simply odd. Children hurried past her door, casting curious glances but never daring to linger. One afternoon, as rain tapped gently on the rooftops and the air smelled of wet earth, Elias found himself walking down this quiet street. He paused before Madame Lucille's house, drawn by the golden glow spilling from the windows. Through the glass, he saw her sitting at a small table, knitting a scarf in shades of blue and green. She looked up, caught his gaze, and beckoned him inside with a gentle wave. Elias entered, shaking droplets from his cloak. The room was filled with the scent of baking bread and lavender. Books lined the shelves, photographs crowded the mantel, and everywhere there were signs of life. A cat curled on a cushion, flowers blooming in jars, half-finished puzzles on the sideboard. "Welcome," Madame Lucille greeted him, her voice soft as velvet. "I don't often have visitors these days. Please, sit." Elias settled into a chair by the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. "Your home is beautiful," he said, "and so full of light." Lucille smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I like to see the world, and I like the world to see me. When my husband was alive, we always kept the curtains open. He said it reminded him that we are all part of something larger, that hiding only makes us feel smaller." She set aside her knitting and poured Elias a cup of tea. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, listening to the rain and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. After a time, Lucille spoke again, her tone wistful. "Not everyone understands. People say I should close my curtains, keep my life private. They think I'm inviting trouble or judgment. But I've spent too many years hiding, from grief, from fear, from what others might think. Now, I choose openness, even if it means being seen in my vulnerability." Elias nodded, sensing the depth beneath her words. There is courage in letting yourself be seen. Many people live behind walls, afraid to show their true selves. Lucille looked down at her hands, fingers twisted with age. "It wasn't always easy. After my husband died, I closed the curtains for months. I thought if I shut out the world, the pain would stay away. But the darkness grew heavier, and I felt more alone than ever. One morning, I opened the windows wide, let the sun pour in, and realized that healing begins with allowing light to touch even the places that hurt." Elias listened deeply, honoring her story. The Buddha taught, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. To live openly is to trust that our truth, however imperfect, is worthy of the light. Just then, a timid knock sounded at the door. A young boy, no more than 10, stood on the threshold, clutching a broken toy car. His name was Theo, and he lived 2 houses down. He glanced nervously at Elias, then at Lucille. I saw your light on," Theo stammered. "My car broke. My mom says you're good at fixing things." Lucille's face lit up. "Of course, dear. Come in." Theo stepped inside, shoulders hunched. As Lucille examined the toy, Elias watched the boy's eyes wander around the room, taking in the open windows, the cheerful clutter, the sense of welcome. While Lucille worked, Theo confided in Elias, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some kids at school make fun of me. They say I talk too much, that I'm weird. Sometimes I wish I could disappear." Elias placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You are not alone in feeling that way. Many people hide parts of themselves, afraid of being judged. But when we close ourselves off, we miss the chance to connect, to be understood, to find kindness." Lucille finished repairing the car and handed it back to Theo, who grinned in delight. "Thank you," he exclaimed. "You're always welcome here," Lucille replied. "Remember, this house has no curtains. You can come anytime, just as you are." Theo left, skipping down the street, his laughter echoing through the rain. Elias turned to Lucille, gratitude shining in his eyes. "You have created a sanctuary," he said, "a place where people can be seen and accepted." Lucille smiled, tears glistening. "I hope so. I spent too long believing I had to hide my sorrow, my quirks, my needs. Now I want to offer others what I once needed most, a safe space to be real." As evening fell, neighbors passed by, glancing curiously at the lighted windows. Some slowed, tempted by the warmth within. 1 or 2 waved shyly. Lucille waved back, her gesture an invitation to connection. Elias rose to leave, pausing at the door. "May your windows always remain open, and may your light guide others home." He stepped into the rain, feeling its cool blessing on his skin. The street seemed brighter now, the world less divided by walls and shadows. Later, as Elias walked through the quiet town, he reflected on the lesson of the window without curtains, the power of vulnerability, the gift of being seen. He remembered the Buddhist teaching: to share your weakness is to make yourself vulnerable. To make yourself vulnerable is to show your strength. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider: where in your life do you draw the curtains, hiding your true self from the world? What fears keep you from opening your heart, your home, your story? Can you find the courage to let in the light, trusting that your authenticity will invite connection rather than judgment? As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What part of yourself longs to be seen, to be welcomed, to be loved just as it is? May you find the strength to open your own windows, and may your light become a beacon for others seeking acceptance and belonging. Story 15, The Watcher on the Rooftop. In the heart of the city, where narrow streets twisted between old stone buildings and the hum of life never truly faded, there was a rooftop that overlooked it all. From this perch, one could see the patchwork of tiled roofs, the spires of distant churches, and at night, the golden constellations of streetlights that mirrored the stars above. Few people ever climbed so high, but for some, the height offered a refuge from the restless world below. Elias found himself drawn to this rooftop late one evening when the city's bustle had softened into the hush of midnight. He climbed the winding staircase of an old apartment block, each step creaking beneath his weight, until he emerged into the cool air and the wide open sky. There, sitting cross-legged near the edge, was a young man named Remy. Remy was known in the building as the Night Watcher. He worked long hours at a bakery, slept fitfully during the day, and spent most nights on the roof gazing at the city lights or the drifting clouds. Tonight, his face was pale and drawn, his eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. He barely glanced up as Elias approached, lost in thought. "May I join you?" Elias asked quietly. Remy nodded, gesturing to a spot beside him. For a while, they sat together in silence, listening to the distant rumble of traffic and the occasional bark of a dog far below. The wind tugged gently at their hair, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and baking bread. After some time, Elias spoke. "It is peaceful here, yet I sense your mind is not at rest." Remy sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "I can't sleep. No matter how hard I try, my thoughts keep spinning. Some nights I worry about money. Will I make rent? Will I keep my job? Other nights, it's memories I can't escape, regrets that haunt me. And sometimes, it's just noise. The city never really sleeps, and neither do I." He paused, voice trembling. "I come up here to find quiet, but the quiet only makes my mind louder." Elias listened deeply, honoring the vulnerability in Remy's words. Many people believe that stillness means silence, that if we remove ourselves from the world, our minds will become calm. But often, when the outer world grows quiet, the inner world begins to speak. Remy nodded, hugging his knees to his chest. "Sometimes I wish I could turn off my thoughts, just for a little while. I feel like I'm always running from something, even when I'm standing still." Elias smiled gently. "Would you like to hear a story?" Remy looked over, curiosity flickering in his tired eyes. "Yes, please." "In a small monastery," Elias began, "there lived a monk who struggled with restless thoughts. Every night, as the others slept, he would sit awake, plagued by worries and memories. He tried everything, chanting, fasting, even staying awake until exhaustion claimed him, but nothing brought peace. One night, the abbot found him pacing the courtyard. "Why do you fight your mind so?" the abbot asked. The monk replied, "My thoughts are like wild horses. I cannot control them." The abbot smiled and said, "Sit with me. Let us listen to the horses together." They sat in silence, simply observing the monk's thoughts as they came and went. Memories, fears, hopes, regrets. The abbot did not judge or try to change them. He simply watched. In time, the monk learned that his thoughts were not enemies to be conquered, but visitors to be welcomed and released. With practice, the horses grew less wild, and peace returned. Remy considered this, his brow furrowed. But what if the thoughts never stop? What if they're too much? Elias placed a comforting hand on Remy's shoulder. The Buddha taught, you cannot stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. Our minds will always generate thoughts. It is their nature. But we can choose how we relate to them. Instead of fighting or fleeing, we can observe, breathe, and let them pass. He guided Remy through a simple meditation. Close your eyes. Feel the breath moving in and out of your body. When a thought arises, notice it. Give it a name, if you wish. Worry, regret, hope. Then let it drift away like a cloud across the sky. Return to your breath again and again. Remy closed his eyes, following Elias's instructions. At first, his mind raced, a flurry of anxieties and unfinished business. But as he breathed, naming each thought and letting it go, a subtle shift occurred. The thoughts became less urgent, less overwhelming. The rooftop seemed to expand, filled with space and possibility. When Remy opened his eyes, the city looked different, softer, more forgiving. The lights twinkled, the wind felt gentle against his skin. I feel lighter, he whispered. Not empty, but spacious, like there's room for everything, even the hard things. Elias nodded. This is the gift of mindful presence. We do not banish our thoughts, nor do we drown in them. We learn to watch, to witness, to rest in the space between. They sat together as the night deepened, sharing stories and silences. Remy spoke of his childhood, his dreams of becoming a writer, his fear of failing those he loved. Elias listened, offering no solutions, only acceptance. As dawn painted the rooftops with gold, Remy stood and stretched, a smile breaking through his fatigue. Thank you, Elias. Maybe tonight I'll try sleeping without running away first. Elias smiled, rising to leave. Remember, the rooftop is always here, inside you, a place to watch, to breathe, to begin again. Remy watched as Elias disappeared down the stairs, then turned back to the city, feeling for the first time that he belonged not only to the world below, but also to the vastness above. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, where do you seek refuge from your restless mind? What thoughts chase you through the night, and how might you meet them with gentleness rather than resistance? Can you create a rooftop within yourself, a place to watch, to breathe, to allow everything to come and go? As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What would it feel like to witness your thoughts without judgment, to let them pass like clouds across the sky? May you find peace in the watching, and may your nights become sanctuaries of rest and renewal. Story 16, The Old Lighthouse Keeper. At the very edge of the continent, where cliffs plunged into the wild embrace of the sea, and winds sang ancient songs through fields of heather, there stood a lighthouse older than memory. Its white tower rose from the rocks like a solitary sentinel, battered by salt and storms, its lantern room crowned with glass that had seen more tempests than any living soul. For generations, this beacon had guided sailors home, its light cutting through fog and darkness, offering hope to those who wandered the endless blue. Elias arrived at this lonely place as autumn deepened, the air crisp and sharp, the sky forever shifting between gold and gray. He walked the narrow path that wound between brambles and tufts of wind-bent grass, boots crunching on gravel, the distant roar of surf ever present in his ears. The sea below was restless, sending up plumes of spray that tasted of longing and memory. Above it all, the lighthouse stood silent, its lamp waiting for dusk. Inside, the spiral staircase echoed with each step as Elias climbed toward the lantern room. The stone walls were cool and damp, adorned with faded photographs, ships long vanished, faces now only memories. At the top, surrounded by the slow rotation of the great glass prism and the steady pulse of the lamp, stood Marek, the keeper. His beard was white as sea foam, his hands gnarled by years of labor, his eyes the color of distant horizons. Marek glanced up as Elias entered, then returned to polishing the lens with practiced care. The two men stood together in companionable silence, the air thick with the scent of oil and salt. Through the windows, clouds scudded low, rain threatening on the wind. "It is a beautiful view," Elias said quietly, "but a lonely one." Marek grunted softly, not unkindly. "The sea gives and takes. I have watched it for 50 years. Some nights I think I see faces in the waves, old friends, lost ships, memories that refuse to drift away." He paused, gazing out at the churning water. "People ask why I stay. They say the world has changed, that no one needs the lighthouse anymore. But I remember the storms, the wrecks, the lives saved because this light cut through the dark. As long as I am able, I will keep it burning." Elias listened, sensing the weight behind Marek's words. "There is devotion in your service," he said gently. "But I wonder, who tends your own light?" Marek shrugged, shoulders stooped beneath invisible burdens. "I suppose I do, in my way. I read old letters, listen to the radio, mend nets for the fishermen. Sometimes I talk to the gulls. It is enough most days." They stood in silence, watching the weather change. Far out at sea, a fishing boat bobbed, its lights flickering in the dusk. The wind rattled the panes, and Marek checked the lamp again, hands moving with muscle memory born of decades. "Do you ever wish for company?" Elias asked. Marek hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. There are nights when the loneliness howls louder than the wind. I miss my wife's laughter, the noise of children running up these stairs. Now, only memories climb with me. My children live inland, busy with their own lives. The sea keeps me company, but it cannot answer back." Elias sat on a wooden stool, folding his hands in his lap. "Would you like to hear a story?" Marek looked at him, curiosity softening his features. "Aye, go on." "In a small village by the sea," Elias began, "there lived a woman who kept a lantern in her window every night so her husband could find his way home from fishing. Even after he was gone, she continued to light the lamp, believing that love endures beyond absence. One winter, a terrible storm struck, and a stranger lost on the cliffs saw her light and found shelter. The villagers realized that her simple act had become a beacon, not just for her beloved, but for all who wandered in darkness." Marek listened, his gaze far away. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone sees my light anymore. Ships have their own navigation now. Fewer come this way." Elias smiled gently. "We never know whose path we illuminate. The Buddha taught thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. Your devotion matters, even when unseen." As night fell, Marek prepared the lamp, filling it with oil and trimming the wick. Elias helped, their movements quiet and reverent. When the light blazed forth, cutting through mist and rain, Marek stood back, pride and sorrow mingling in his eyes. They shared a meal of bread and fish, Marek telling stories of storms survived and ships rescued. He spoke of loss, too, the friends who never returned, the ache of empty rooms, the birthdays and anniversaries marked alone. Elias listened, offering presents rather than answers, honoring the fullness of Marek's solitude. Later, as the storm intensified, a faint knock sounded at the heavy door below. Marek descended, returning moments later with a young sailor, drenched and shivering. His boat had run aground in the fog, and the lighthouse had guided him to safety. Marek wrapped him in blankets, brewed hot tea, and sat with him until warmth returned to his cheeks. When the sailor finally slept, Marek turned to Elias, gratitude shining through his weariness.
Perhaps the world still needs this old light after all. Elias nodded. Every act of care ripples outward, touching lives we may never know. To tend the light is to trust in connection, even across distance and time. They returned to the lantern room, watching as the beam swept across the black water. Marek grew thoughtful. "You asked who tends my light. Tonight, I think, perhaps you do. And perhaps, by keeping this flame alive, I tend yours as well." Elias smiled, feeling the truth of those words settle deep within him. We are all lighthouses for one another, sometimes without knowing. As dawn broke, painting the sea with gold, Marek stood at the window, watching the waves calm. The lighthouse glowed, steadfast against the morning sky. Gulls wheeled and cried, sunlight sparkling on their wings. Before leaving, Elias placed a hand on Marek's shoulder. "May your light always shine, for yourself as much as for others.
And may you know that your solitude is not emptiness, but space filled with meaning." Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, where in your life do you tend a light for others, even when no one seems to notice? What acts of devotion or kindness do you offer, uncertain if they matter? Can you trust that your light, however humble, guides more than you realize? As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. Who has been a lighthouse for you, and how might you honor their gift by keeping your own flame alive? May you find solace in the knowledge that every light, seen or unseen, helps dispel the darkness. And may your own acts of care shine bravely, guiding others home through every storm. Story 17. The Weaver's Tangle. In a quiet valley where the morning mist lingered long after sunrise, there was a cottage with windows always open to the breeze. Inside, sunlight played across walls hung with tapestries, vivid scenes of forests, rivers, and distant mountains, each one woven by the hands of Marianne, the village weaver. Her loom stood in the center of the room, a sturdy wooden frame threaded with strands of every color imaginable. To the villagers, her work was magic. To Marianne, it was a daily practice of patience and devotion. Elias arrived at the cottage on a day when the sky was pale and restless, clouds drifting like unspun wool above the fields. He found Marianne bent over her loom, her brow furrowed, fingers working at a stubborn knot in the warp threads. The room was filled with half-finished pieces, some bright and bold, others muted and gentle. But all bore signs of struggle, uneven lines, tangled yarn, colors that clashed rather than harmonized. Marianne looked up as Elias entered, offering a weary smile. "Forgive the mess," she said. "It's been a difficult week. Nothing seems to go right." Elias sat quietly beside her, watching her hands move with both skill and frustration. "What troubles you?" he asked, gently. She sighed, setting aside her shuttle. "I've been trying to finish this tapestry for weeks. Every time I think I'm making progress, another knot appears. Sometimes I untangle one only to find two more. The harder I pull, the tighter they become. I know I should be patient, but I can't help feeling defeated." Elias nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "Would you like to hear a story?" Marianne nodded, rubbing her tired eyes. "In a distant monastery," Elias began, "there lived a monk who was tasked with repairing the temple's ancient prayer flags. Each flag was frayed and knotted from years of wind and rain. At first, the monk tried to fix them quickly, tugging at the knots in frustration. But the fabric tore and the knots grew tighter. One evening, the abbot found him weeping in the courtyard. "You cannot force the threads to obey," the abbot said. "Sit with them. Breathe. Let your hands be guided by patience, not anger." The monk returned to his task, this time working slowly, breathing deeply, treating each knot as a teacher rather than an enemy. In time, the flags were mended, not perfectly, but lovingly. Marianne listened, her shoulders relaxing. "I suppose I have been fighting the threads instead of working with them."
Elias smiled. Sometimes our struggles are not obstacles, but invitations to slow down, to pay attention, to bring gentleness to places of tension. She picked up her loom again, examining the tangled threads. "It's not just the weaving," she admitted. "My life feels knotted too. My mother is ill, my brother and I argue constantly, and I worry about the future. It's as if every part of me is pulled in a different direction." Elias placed a comforting hand on her arm. "Life is a tapestry, woven from many threads. Joy and sorrow, hope and fear, love and loss. When we try to control every strand, we create tension. But when we allow space for imperfection, for pauses and mistakes, the pattern finds its own beauty." He watched as Marianne began to work again, this time moving more slowly, her breath steady. She teased apart a knot, letting it loosen before guiding the thread back into place. As she worked, the tapestry took on new life. Its flaws became features, its irregularities marks of authenticity. They spent the afternoon together, sharing stories and silences. Marianne spoke of her childhood, of learning to weave at her grandmother's knee, of the pride she felt when her first tapestry hung in the village hall. She confessed her fears, that she would never be good enough, that her efforts would unravel, that her family's troubles would never mend. Elias listened, honoring each word. The Buddha taught, if you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will know complete peace. Weaving, like living, is an act of letting go, of perfection, of certainty, of the need to control every outcome. As dusk fell, Marianne finished the last row of her tapestry. She held it up to the light, seeing not just the mistakes, but the harmony that had emerged from struggle. "It's not perfect," she said softly, "but it's mine, and maybe that's enough." Elias nodded. Beauty is born from patience and acceptance. Each knot you untangle teaches you something about yourself and about the world. They shared a simple meal, bread and cheese and apples from the orchard. Marianne laughed for the first time in days, the sound light as spun silk. She thanked Elias for his presence, for reminding her that the process mattered more than the product. Before leaving, Elias paused at the door. "Remember, every tapestry tells a story, not just of skill, but of perseverance, forgiveness, and hope. Trust the pattern, even when you cannot see the whole design." But as night deepened and the moon rose high, Marianne found herself unable to sleep. She lit a candle and returned to her loom, drawn by a new sense of curiosity. She studied the tangles left behind, the rough patches and abrupt changes in color. For the first time, she saw not failure, but evidence of her journey. A record of days when her heart was heavy, or her mind distracted, or her spirit bold and playful. With slow, deliberate movements, she began to weave again. This time, she chose threads not for their perfection, but for their meaning. She wove in a piece of blue yarn from her mother's old shawl, a golden strand from her brother's scarf, a bit of green from the fields outside her window. Each knot became a memory, each flaw a testament to resilience. As the hours passed, Marianne lost herself in the rhythm of the loom, the soft thump of the shuttle, the gentle pull of the threads, the whisper of fabric growing beneath her hands. She breathed deeply, letting go of the urge to rush or to judge. The tapestry grew stranger, richer, more alive. By dawn, she had finished a small section, a patchwork of color and texture, wild and imperfect, yet somehow beautiful. She stepped back, studying her work in the golden morning light. For the first time, she felt proud, not because the tapestry was flawless, but because it was honest. It told the truth of her days, her doubts, her hopes. Later, as villagers passed by her cottage, they noticed the new tapestry hanging in the window. Some admired its boldness, others questioned its oddities, but all agreed it was unlike anything Marianne had made before. A few neighbors, inspired by her courage, brought their own unfinished projects to share. Knitted scarves with dropped stitches, poems with crossed-out lines, songs that trailed off into silence. Together, they laughed and told stories, finding comfort in the shared experience of imperfection. Marianne realized that her knots and tangles had become bridges, connecting her to others in ways she had never imagined. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, where in your life do you encounter tangles and knots? How do you respond? To fight, to flee, or to breathe and begin again? Can you trust that patience and gentleness will reveal a pattern, even in the midst of confusion? As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What would it feel like to honor your struggles as teachers, to welcome imperfection as part of your unique design? May you find peace in the weaving of your days, and may your life become a tapestry rich with color, texture, and the quiet strength that comes from letting go.
Story 18. The Painter's Palette. In a small village nestled between emerald hills and silver streams, there lived an artist named Luke. His cottage stood at the edge of a wildflower meadow, its walls wrapped in ivy and its windows always open to the shifting light. Inside, every surface was alive with color. Canvases propped against the walls, some complete, others abandoned mid-brushstroke. Jars of cloudy water, brushes worn to nubs, palettes smeared with every hue imaginable. The air was thick with the scent of linseed oil, turpentine, and the subtle perfume of fresh blooms drifting in from outside. Elias arrived one afternoon as the sun slipped behind clouds, dappling the world in shifting gold and shadow. He followed the winding path to Luke's door, drawn by the faint sound of humming and the soft scrape of brush on canvas. Through the open window, he glimpsed Luke standing before a large easel, brow furrowed, palette trembling in his hand. Luke did not notice Elias at first. He was lost in the painting, a landscape of rolling fields beneath a stormy sky. But something in the scene felt unresolved. The colors clashed, the horizon wavered, and Luke's movements grew more agitated with each stroke. At last, he set down his brush with a sigh, running his hands through his hair. "It's no use," he muttered. "No matter what I do, it never matches what I see in my mind." Elias knocked gently and stepped inside, his presence calm as a summer breeze. "May I sit with you?" he asked. Luke nodded, too weary to protest. For a while, they sat together in silence, watching the light shift across the canvas. Outside, bees buzzed among the flowers, and the distant bell of the church marked the passing of another hour. Finally, Elias spoke. "What troubles you, Luke?" The artist shook his head. "I want to capture the beauty I see, the way the sky changes after rain, the way the fields glow at sunset. But every time I try, I fall short. My colors are wrong, my lines uncertain. Sometimes I wonder if I should give up altogether." He gestured to the unfinished paintings scattered around the room. "Each one is a record of failure. I keep hoping that if I get the right shade, the right shape, I'll finally create something true. But the harder I try, the further it slips away." Elias listened deeply, honoring the ache in Luke's words. "Would you like to hear a story?" he offered. Luke managed a tired smile. "Please." "In a monastery high in the mountains," Elias began, "there lived a monk who painted mandalas, intricate circles meant to represent the universe. Each day, he would grind pigments, mix colors, and paint with painstaking care. But whenever he finished, the abbot would sweep the mandala away, reminding him that all things are impermanent. At first, the monk despaired. Why bother creating beauty if it would only be erased? But over time, he learned to love the process itself, the feel of the brush, the play of color, the act of attention. He realized that beauty was not just in the finished work, but in the willingness to engage fully, moment by moment, without clinging to the result. Luke was silent for a long time, absorbing the story. But how do I let go of wanting it to be perfect? How do I accept the flaws? Elias smiled softly. In Buddhist teaching, there is a saying, "Do not seek perfection, but completeness." Completeness does not mean flawlessness. It means embracing every part of the experience, joy and frustration, inspiration and doubt, boldness and hesitation. Your palette holds every color, even those you might wish to avoid. To paint truly, you must allow them all their place. He picked up a palette, studying the streaks of blue, green, ochre, and crimson. What if you tried painting with your feelings rather than against them? What if you let sorrow, anger, hope, and gratitude all find their expression on the canvas? Luke hesitated, then dipped his brush into a deep, stormy blue. He swept it across the sky, letting the color bleed and swirl. Next came a slash of gold, bright and unexpected, cutting through the darkness. With each stroke, Luke allowed himself to feel, not just the beauty, but the struggle, the longing, the disappointment. The painting changed, becoming less about the scene outside his window and more about the landscape within his heart. As the afternoon faded into evening, Luke stepped back from the canvas. It was raw, unfinished, and utterly honest. He saw not failure, but courage, a willingness to meet himself where he was without judgment. They shared a simple meal, bread and cheese and fresh strawberries from the garden. Luke spoke of his childhood, of the first time he mixed colors with his mother, of the joy he felt when she praised his drawings. He confessed his fear of being misunderstood, of disappointing those who believed in him. Elias listened, offering only presence. The Buddha taught, to understand everything is to forgive everything. When you accept yourself, your doubts, your hopes, your shadows, you make space for healing and growth. Art is not a contest, but a conversation between your soul and the world. Night fell, and Luke lit a candle, its flame dancing in the dark. He gazed at his painting, feeling a new sense of peace. "Thank you, Elias. I think I can begin again tomorrow, with all my colors, not just the ones I like." Before leaving, Elias paused at the door. "Remember, your life is a palette. Every emotion, every experience adds depth and richness to your days. Trust the process and let your heart guide your hand." But as the night deepened and quiet settled over the cottage, Luke found himself unable to sleep. He rose and returned to his studio, lighting a lamp and sitting before his easel. He studied the canvases, those abandoned in frustration, those never shown to anyone. He realized that each bore witness to a different season of his life, a winter of grief, a spring of hope, a summer of restless energy, an autumn of gentle reflection. With a deep breath, Luke began to paint again. This time, he did not try to control the outcome. He let his hand move freely, mixing colors he had once avoided, muddy browns, bruised purples, fierce reds. He painted his loneliness, his laughter, his longing for connection. He painted memories of his mother's embrace, the sting of harsh words, the warmth of friendship. The canvas became a mirror, reflecting not only the world outside, but the truth of his inner landscape. By dawn, Luke had filled 3 new canvases. They were wild, imperfect, and achingly real. He felt exhausted, but also strangely alive. He understood now that art was not about achieving perfection, but about honoring the fullness of experience, light and shadow, clarity and confusion, certainty and doubt. Later, as villagers passed by his cottage, they noticed the new paintings displayed in the window. Some admired their boldness, others questioned their strangeness, but all agreed they were unlike anything Luke had made before.
A few neighbors, inspired by his honesty, brought their own creative works to share. Poems scribbled on scraps of paper, songs sung softly in the twilight, stories told around kitchen tables. Together they laughed and shared, finding comfort in the recognition that everyone carried a palette of emotions, a spectrum of experience. Luke realized that his willingness to show his true colors had become an invitation for others to do the same. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, what colors do you hide from in your own life? Where do you demand perfection, and where might you allow completeness instead? Can you welcome every feeling as part of your unique masterpiece? As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What would it feel like to paint your days with honesty, allowing both light and shadow to shape your journey? May you find beauty in the full spectrum of your experience, and may your life become a canvas rich with truth, compassion, and creative courage. Story 19. The Beekeeper's Lesson. In the gentle hills beyond the village, where wildflowers nodded in the breeze and orchards stretched toward the horizon, there lived a beekeeper named Sophie. Her cottage was tucked among apple trees, its garden buzzing with life. Wooden hives dotted the sunlit yard, each one home to thousands of honeybees. The air here was always sweet, fragrant with clover, lavender, and the golden promise of honey. Elias arrived on a morning thick with dew, the world shimmering as if newly born. He followed the winding path through tall grass, pausing to watch bees dart from blossom to blossom, their bodies dusted with pollen. At the gate, he found Sophie kneeling beside a hive, her hands steady, her face serene beneath the brim of a straw hat. She looked up as Elias approached, offering a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Good morning, traveler. Have you come for honey or for company?" "Perhaps both," Elias replied, settling onto a bench beneath a pear tree. "Your garden is alive with music." Sophie laughed softly. "The bees are tireless musicians. I only hope to keep their orchestra in tune." They sat together in companionable silence, listening to the hum of wings and the distant call of a lark. After a while, Sophie grew thoughtful, her gaze lingering on a hive whose entrance was strangely quiet. "That one worries me," she said, nodding toward the silent box. "Last week, I opened it and found most of the colony gone. Colony collapse, they call it. Sometimes, despite all my care, the bees simply vanish. It's a loss that feels personal, like losing a part of myself." Elias listened, sensing the ache beneath her words. "How do you respond when such loss comes?" Sophie sighed, brushing soil from her hands. "At first, I grieve. I wonder what I did wrong. Was it disease, weather, something I missed? Then I remind myself that beekeeping is a lesson in impermanence. Each season brings change, birth and death, abundance and scarcity. I mourn, but I also begin again. I clean the hive, plant more flowers, trust that new bees will come." Elias nodded, honoring her resilience. "Would you like to hear a story?" Sophie smiled. "Always." "In a distant land," Elias began, "there was a monk who tended a garden filled with butterflies. One spring, a terrible storm swept through, scattering the butterflies and destroying the flowers. The monk wept for his loss, believing his work had been for nothing. But as summer returned, he noticed seeds sprouting in unexpected places, wildflowers blooming along the paths, butterflies returning in greater numbers than before. The garden was changed, but not ruined. The monk learned that loss often prepares the ground for new beginnings." Sophie was silent for a long moment, watching a bead disappear into a foxglove bell. "It's hard to accept that some things are beyond my control. I want to protect my bees, shield them from every danger. But nature has its own rhythm, its own wisdom." Elias smiled gently. "The Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence. We tend our gardens, our hives, our hearts, not to guarantee outcomes, but to participate in the dance of life. Loss is inevitable, but so is renewal. Sophie rose and led Elias to the silent hive. Together, they opened it, examining the empty combs, the faint scent of wax and honey lingering in the air. Sophie cleaned away debris, speaking softly to the absent bees.
She replaced the frames, closed the lid, and placed the sprig of lavender at the entrance, a gesture of farewell and hope. As they walked back to the cottage, Sophie shared stories of her years as a beekeeper. The joy of a heavy honey harvest, the sting of sudden losses, the lessons learned from watching bees work together in perfect harmony. A hive is a miracle of cooperation, she said. Each bee has a role. Some gather nectar, others guard the entrance, still others tend the young. No single bee can survive alone, but together they create sweetness. Elias listened, reflecting on the wisdom in her words. We, too, are part of many hives, families, communities, friendships. When one part suffers, all feel the loss. But when we support each other, even after setbacks, we find strength to rebuild. They shared a simple lunch, fresh bread, cheese, apples, and honey so fragrant it tasted of sunlight. Sophie spoke of her hopes for the coming season, her plans to plant more wildflowers, her dream of teaching children about the importance of bees. As afternoon shadows lengthened, a swarm of bees appeared above the orchard, swirling in a golden cloud. Sophie watched with delight as the bees settled near the empty hive, their queen leading the way. With careful hands, she guided them inside, welcoming new life into the space left by loss. Elias smiled, witnessing the cycle of ending and beginning. Your patience and care have created a home for renewal. The Buddha taught, just as a candle cannot burn without fire, man cannot live without a spiritual life. Your devotion is your flame. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the garden glowed with amber light, Sophie and Elias sat beneath the pear tree, savoring the peace that follows a day well spent. The hives buzzed with new energy, and the air was sweet with promise. But as twilight deepened, Sophie's thoughts turned inward. She confessed to Elias, "Sometimes I worry that my efforts are too small. There are so many threats to the bees. Pesticides, changing weather, diseases I cannot see. What if all my tending isn't enough?" Elias regarded her with warmth. There is an old teaching. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. Every act of care, no matter how small, sends ripples outward. Perhaps you cannot save every bee, but you create a sanctuary, a place where life can begin again. That is enough. Sophie nodded, comforted by his words. She remembered the faces of children who had visited her garden, the neighbors who brought jars for honey, the friends who planted wildflowers after hearing her speak. Her work was not solitary. It was woven into the fabric of the community. Later, as stars blossomed overhead and the night air cooled, Sophie lit a lantern and walked among the hives. She whispered blessings over each one, thanking the bees for their labor, for the sweetness they shared, for the lessons they offered in persistence and humility. Elias watched from the porch, reflecting on the cycles of loss and renewal that shaped every life. He thought of his own journeys, the people he had met, the moments of sorrow and hope that had marked his path. He understood that to care deeply was to risk heartbreak, but also to open oneself to the miracles of return. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, where in your life have you experienced loss or disappointment? How do you respond? Do you close your heart, or do you clear the hive and make room for something new? Can you trust in the cycles of change, knowing that every ending holds the seed of a beginning? As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect.
What old sorrow might you release, and what hope might you welcome in its place? May you find courage in the example of the beekeeper, tending patiently to what remains, and may your days be filled with the sweetness that comes from embracing both loss and renewal. Story 20. The Cobbler's Shoes. In the heart of a bustling market town, where the clatter of carts and the laughter of children filled the air, there was a small shop with a sign shaped like a boot. The windows were always polished, and the bell above the door chimed cheerfully whenever someone entered. This was the workshop of Andre, the cobbler, a man known for his skill in mending soles and stitching leather until even the oldest shoes felt new again. Andre's hands were strong and sure, his fingers nimble from years of threading needles and shaping lasts. People came from distant villages to have their boots repaired or to order a pair of his famous walking shoes, which seemed to carry their wearers farther and more comfortably than any others. Yet if one looked closely at Andre himself, they would notice something odd. The cobbler's own shoes were worn thin, patched many times, and so old that the original color was almost forgotten. Elias arrived in town on a cool morning, the scent of baking bread mingling with the tang of tanned leather. He wandered through the market, greeting vendors and listening to the music of daily life. When he reached Andre's shop, he paused, drawn by the sight of the cobbler bent over his workbench, surrounded by piles of gleaming boots and polished sandals. The bell tinkled as Elias entered. Andre glanced up, offering a warm smile. "Good day, traveler. What brings you to my humble shop?" "I've heard your shoes are the best in the region," Elias replied, admiring the rows of finished pairs. "But I see your own are quite well loved." Andre laughed, a little embarrassed. "There's always another pair to finish, another customer to help. My own shoes can wait."
Elias settled onto a wooden stool, watching as Andre deftly stitched a sole. "You take great care of others' needs," he observed, "but when do you care for your own?" Andre shrugged, focusing on his needlework. "I suppose I find satisfaction in service. Seeing someone walk away happy is reward enough. Besides, it feels selfish to spend time on myself when there's so much to do." Elias nodded, sensing the quiet fatigue beneath Andre's cheerful manner. "Would you allow me to share a story?" Andre smiled, setting aside his tools. "Please do. Stories make the work lighter." "In a distant village," Elias began, "there lived a healer who was loved by all. She tended the sick, comforted the grieving, and gave her herbs freely. But she neglected her own health, believing others' needs were more important. One winter, she fell ill. The villagers, realizing how much they depended on her, gathered to care for her in turn. They brought soup, tended her garden, and sat by her bedside. Slowly, she recovered and learned that caring for herself was not selfish, but necessary. Only then could she continue to heal others." Andre listened, his hands still. "It's hard to accept help. I'm used to being the one people rely on." Elias smiled gently. "The Buddha taught, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Service is noble, but it cannot come at the cost of your own well-being. Even the strongest shoes will wear out if never tended." A silence settled between them, filled with the ticking of the clock and the distant chatter of the market. After a while, Andre spoke softly. "Sometimes, at night, my feet ache so badly I can hardly sleep. I tell myself it doesn't matter, that I'll make new shoes tomorrow, but tomorrow never comes for me." Elias placed a comforting hand on Andre's arm. "What would happen if you made a pair just for yourself, not as an afterthought, but as an act of kindness?" Andre hesitated, then chuckled. "Perhaps I'd walk farther, feel lighter. Maybe I'd remember what it's like to be cared for." Elias encouraged him. "Why not begin today? Let this be your practice.
not only to serve others, but to honor your own needs. With a sheepish grin, Andre rummaged through his supplies, selecting the finest leather and softest lining. He measured his feet carefully, cut the pieces with precision, and began to stitch. As he worked, Elias watched the transformation. The way Andre's posture straightened, the lightness that crept into his eyes. They talked as Andre sewed, sharing stories of childhood, dreams, and disappointments. Andre confessed his fear of appearing selfish, of losing customers if he took time for himself. Elias reassured him. True generosity begins with self-respect. When you walk in comfort, you teach others to value themselves as well. As the afternoon sun moved across the sky, customers came and went. Some teased Andre about finally making shoes for himself, others offered encouragement. A young girl, clutching her mother's hand, watched in fascination as Andre worked. "Will those be the fastest shoes in town?" she asked shyly. Andre laughed, his mood brightening. Perhaps, or at least the happiest. By evening, the shoes were finished, sturdy, handsome, and perfectly fitted. Andre slipped them on, marveling at the support and softness. He stood, walked around the shop, and laughed aloud. "I had forgotten how good it feels." Elias smiled. When we care for ourselves, we renew our strength to care for others. The world does not suffer when you show yourself compassion, it benefits. That night, as Andre closed his shop, he noticed the aches in his body had eased. He slept deeply, waking refreshed for the first time in months. In the days that followed, he found new energy for his work, greater patience with his customers, and a quiet joy in each step he took. Word spread through the village about the cobbler's new shoes. Some neighbors teased him kindly, others asked for a pair just like his. Andre shared his story, encouraging others to tend to their own needs without guilt. He began to notice other ways he could care for himself: a cup of tea in the afternoon, a walk by the river at sunset, time spent reading or simply resting. These small acts of kindness multiplied, filling his days with ease and gratitude. One evening, as the market closed and the last rays of sunlight slanted through the window, Andre sat with Elias and reflected on the change. "I thought taking care of myself would mean less for others, but now I see it means more. I am more present, more generous, more alive." Elias nodded, his eyes shining with approval. The Buddha also taught, "To keep the body in good health is a duty, otherwise we shall not be able to keep our mind strong and clear. Self-care is not selfish, it is wisdom." Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, where in your life do you put others before yourself, neglecting your own well-being? What small act of kindness might you offer yourself, not as indulgence, but as necessity? As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What would it feel like to walk your path in comfort, supported by your own care? May you find balance between giving and receiving, and may your journey be gentle, every step blessed by compassion for yourself and for the world. Story 21. The Storyteller's Silence. In a town where the river curled through ancient streets and laughter echoed in every square, there lived a storyteller named Emil. His voice was known by all, deep and melodic, able to conjure whole worlds from thin air. Children gathered at his feet in the marketplace, eyes wide with wonder as he spun tales of dragons in distant lands. Old men nodded along to his stories of love and loss, finding pieces of their own lives woven into his words. For years, Emil's stories were the heartbeat of the town, bringing people together on long winter nights and bright summer mornings alike. But one autumn, as leaves burned gold and red, something changed. Emil fell silent. He no longer appeared in the square or joined friends at the tavern. The window of his cottage stayed shuttered, and when neighbors knocked, he answered only with a faint smile and a shake of his head. Rumors spread. Some said he was ill, others whispered of heartbreak or secret sorrow. The children missed him most, lingering outside his door, hoping for just one more story. Elias arrived in the town as the first frost silvered the rooftops. He noticed the hush that had settled over the place, a quiet deeper than the usual peace of autumn. In the bakery, he heard two women speak in low voices about Emil's absence. At the market, a young boy tugged at Elias's sleeve, asking if he knew any stories to fill the silence. One evening, guided by candlelight and curiosity, Elias found his way to Emil's cottage at the edge of town. He knocked gently, and after a long pause, the door creaked open. Emil stood there, thinner than before, his eyes shadowed but kind. "May I come in?" Elias asked softly. Emil hesitated, then stepped aside. The cottage was warm, filled with the scent of old books and cinnamon tea. Shelves overflowed with notebooks, and a battered lute rested by the hearth. Yet the air felt heavy, as if words themselves had grown tired. They sat together by the fire, sipping tea in silence. After a while, Elias spoke. "The town misses your stories." Emil looked away, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have no stories left. My words have dried up, like a well in drought. When I try to speak, nothing comes. It's as if my voice has abandoned me." Elias listened deeply, honoring the ache beneath Emil's confession. "Would you like to share what burdens your heart?" Emil closed his eyes. "My mother died last month. She was the first to hear my stories, the one who believed in me when I doubted myself. Since she's gone, everything feels empty. I fear that if I speak, my grief will spill out and drown the joy I once brought others." Elias placed a gentle hand on Emil's shoulder. "There is a story from the Buddha's life," he began, "about a musician whose beloved instrument broke. For days he wandered in silence, believing he would never play again. But in that quiet, he heard new music, the wind in the trees, the river song, the rhythm of his own breath. He learned that silence, too, is part of the symphony of life." Emil's eyes filled with tears. "But what if my silence disappoints those who need my stories? What if I am forgotten?" Elias smiled kindly. "Silence is not absence, but presence in another form. The Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes we must rest in stillness, allowing our hearts to heal and our wisdom to deepen. Your silence is not a failure, it is a season of listening." They sat quietly, the fire crackling between them. Emil's breathing slowed, the tension in his shoulders easing. He stared into the flames, remembering the comfort of his mother's arms, the sound of her laughter. After a time, Elias invited Emil to join him for a walk beneath the stars. They wandered through quiet streets, past shuttered shops and sleeping gardens. The night was alive with subtle sounds, the rustle of leaves, the hoot of an owl, the distant rush of water over stones. Elias stopped by the riverbank, gazing at the moon's reflection. When the river runs low, it does not cease to be a river. It rests, gathers strength, and flows again. So it is with your voice. Let silence be your companion, not your enemy." Emil nodded, feeling the truth of these words settle deep within him. "Perhaps I can listen for a while, instead of always speaking." Elias smiled. "Stories are born in silence. When you are ready, your words will return, not as they were, but deeper, truer, shaped by all you have felt." As dawn approached, they returned to the cottage.
Emil thanked Elias, his voice steadier. That morning, instead of forcing himself to perform, Emil sat by his window, watching the world wake. He listened, to birdsong, to laughter in the street, to the quiet pulse of his own heart. Days passed. Emil remained silent, but now he welcomed the stillness. He walked in the woods, wrote in his journal, played soft melodies on his lute. Gradually, he found that grief and memory mingled with hope, that new stories began to stir at the edges of his mind. One evening, as snow began to fall, Emil opened his door to find a group of children waiting outside. They did not ask for a story. Instead, they handed him a drawing, a picture of the storyteller surrounded by friends, a sun shining overhead. Emil smiled, tears in his eyes. He invited them in, and together they sat by the fire, sharing cocoa and quiet company. For the first time in weeks, Emil spoke, not a grand tale, but a simple memory of his mother's kindness. The children listened, content with the gentleness of his words. That night, after the children had gone home, Emil sat by the window, watching the snow drift down in silence. He realized that his mother's spirit lingered, not only in memories, but in the hush between stories, in the space where new beginnings waited. He picked up his notebook and wrote a single line, "In silence, the heart remembers." As the weeks went by, Emil slowly returned to the marketplace. He did not stand on a crate or call for attention. Instead, he sat quietly, letting people gather as they wished. Sometimes he told a story, sometimes he simply listened. The townspeople learned to appreciate the pauses, the moments when words failed and only presence remained. Elias visited often, sitting beside Emil in comfortable silence. Together, they watched the seasons turn, the river rise and fall, the town move through its cycles of noise and quiet. Emil came to understand that storytelling was not only about filling the air with words, but about creating space for others to breathe, to feel, to remember. Dear listener, as you prepare to rest tonight, consider, where in your life do you feel silenced? By grief? By fear? By exhaustion? Can you honor this silence as a necessary part of your journey, trusting that it too holds wisdom? As you drift into sleep, place your hand over your heart and reflect. What might you hear if you allowed yourself to listen deeply without rushing to fill the quiet? May you find peace in the spaces between words, and may your silence become fertile ground for healing, compassion, and the stories yet to come. Story 22, The Distant Thunder. In the velvet hush before dawn, when the world was still draped in midnight blue, and the cobblestone streets of the old village glistened with dew, Brother Elias wandered along the edge of the ancient forest. His monastery, perched atop a gentle hill, watched over the valley like a silent guardian. Stone walls, mossy with age, glowed faintly in the moonlight, and the air carried the scent of lavender and rain-soaked earth. Somewhere far off, thunder grumbled, a deep, distant voice rolling across the hills, echoing through the chestnut trees and into the hearts of those who listened. Elias paused beneath a great oak, whose roots twisted down into the soil like the fingers of time itself. He closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath his feet, the cool breath of morning on his face. The thunder rolled again, not sharp or frightening, but heavy and slow, like an old memory rising from the depths. In that sound, Elias felt the echo of every storm he had weathered. Nights when wind battered the monastery windows, when fear and uncertainty rattled the bones of even the bravest monks. As he stood there, listening, footsteps approached along the gravel path. It was Anna, a young woman from the nearby village. Her hair was the color of ripe wheat, her eyes wide and shadowed with worry. She wore a simple woolen cloak, and her hands trembled as she clutched its edges. "Brother Elias," she called softly, her voice quivering like a candle flame. "May I sit with you?" He nodded, gesturing to the patch of soft grass beneath the oak. Anna sat beside him, drawing her knees close to her chest. For a moment, they listened together to the thunder's song, letting it fill the silence between them. "I haven't slept for days," Anna confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every time the sky darkens, I remember the storm last autumn, the one that flooded our home. My father says it's just weather, but I can't help it. When I hear thunder, my heart races. I feel so small, so helpless." Elias regarded her gently, his gaze kind and steady. "Thunder has a way of awakening old fears," he said. "Sometimes what we hear outside stirs storms within us. Would you like to try something with me, Anna?" She nodded, uncertain but hopeful. "Let's listen to the thunder together, not as enemies, but as curious friends. Close your eyes if you wish. Place your hand over your heart, and notice how you breathe." Anna did as he asked. The next rumble of thunder vibrated through the ground, softer now, but still present. Elias guided her in breathing slowly, inviting her to notice the rise and fall of her chest, the coolness of the air as it entered her nose, the warmth as it left. "Fear," Elias continued, "is like thunder. It comes quickly, shakes us, then passes. But sometimes we hold on to its echo, replaying it in our minds until it becomes a storm that never ends." He reached into his pocket and drew out a smooth river stone, polished by years of water and time. "This stone has survived many storms," he said, placing it in Anna's palm. "It has been shaped by hardship, but it endures. So do we." Anna turned the stone over in her hand, feeling its weight and warmth. It grounded her, offering a small anchor against the waves of anxiety inside her. "The Buddha taught," Elias said, "just as a solid rock is not shaken by the storm, even so the wise are not affected by praise or blame. Our fears are real, but they do not have to define us. When we meet them with awareness and kindness, we become like the stone, steady, grounded, unshaken." The sky began to lighten, streaks of rose and gold creeping over the horizon. The thunder grew more distant, replaced by the tentative calls of blackbirds waking in the hedgerows. Anna's shoulders relaxed, her breathing slowed. Elias led her in a gentle meditation, encouraging her to breathe in peace and breathe out fear. With each exhale, Anna imagined the thunder fading, her body growing heavier, more rooted to the earth. He asked her to notice the sensations, the flutter in her chest, the tension in her jaw, and to greet them with curiosity rather than resistance. "In our modern lives," Elias reflected, "fear often wears many masks. Sometimes it is the anxiety of losing what we love, the dread of failure, the uncertainty of tomorrow. Our minds replay old storms, traumas, losses, harsh words, until they become part of our story. We brace ourselves for thunder that may never come, exhausting our hearts with worry." He looked at Anna, his gaze steady. "But we are not powerless. When we bring mindful attention to our fear, we see it for what it is, a visitor, not a master. We can choose to respond with compassion, to soothe ourselves as we would a frightened child. This is not weakness, but wisdom." Anna's breathing steadied, her hands stopped trembling. For the first time in many nights, she felt the possibility of rest, a softening in her chest, a space opening where courage might grow. "You are stronger than any storm, Anna," Elias said, smiling. "The thunder will come and go, but your spirit endures. Remember this when the sky darkens. Anchor yourself in the present, in your breath, in the knowledge that you have survived every storm so far." As the sun crested the hills, bathing the valley in golden light, Anna stood and bowed. She pressed the stone to her heart, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you, brother," she said. "Tonight, when the thunder comes, I will remember to breathe. I will try to be like the stone."
Elias watched her walk back toward the village, her steps lighter, her shoulders less burdened. He remained beneath the oak, listening as the last echoes of thunder faded into silence. For those listening tonight, perhaps you too know the sound of distant thunder, the old fears that visit in the quiet hours, the memories that shake you awake. Notice how your body responds, the tightening, the racing heart, the urge to hide or run. These are natural, human reactions. You are not alone. What if, instead of fighting the thunder, you welcomed it? What if you placed a gentle hand on your heart, breathed deeply, and whispered, "It's okay to be afraid. I am here. I am safe." In doing so, you honor your vulnerability, and in that honoring, you find strength. The Buddha reminds us, do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment. Fear lives in what was and what might be. Peace is found only in what is. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, invite yourself to let go of old storms. Feel the support of your bed, the softness of your breath. Imagine yourself as a stone, solid, grounded, unshaken. If thunder comes, let it pass through you, knowing it cannot harm the core of who you are. Before you drift into dreams, ask yourself, what thunder echoes in my life? How might I meet it with compassion, with mindfulness, with the quiet strength of a stone?
If this story has touched your heart, please share your reflections below. What storms have you weathered? How do you find calm amidst the thunder? Like, comment, and subscribe to join our circle of healing stories. May you sleep peacefully, anchored in the knowledge that you are resilient and that every storm eventually gives way to dawn. Story 23. The Mapmaker's Compass. In the heart of a quiet town, nestled between rolling hills and silver streams, there stood an old stone house with a crooked chimney and windows that glowed golden at dusk. This was the home of Arthur, the mapmaker, a man whose life had been devoted to tracing the world's edges, charting forests and rivers, mountains and meadows, so that others might find their way. Arthur's workshop was a place of wonder. Shelves overflowed with parchment rolls, compasses, and quills. Globes spun slowly in shafts of morning light. There were maps of places real and imagined, some marked with dragons or ships, others with winding roads that seemed to lead nowhere at all. Yet, despite his skill, Arthur often found himself lost, not on the land, but within his own restless mind. One autumn evening, as rain tapped gently against the window panes and the fire crackled in the hearth, a young woman named Clara arrived at Arthur's door. She was a traveler, her boots caked with mud, her eyes bright with longing and fatigue. She carried a letter from her father, who had once journeyed with Arthur across distant seas. "Mr. Arthur," she said, her voice trembling like the leaves outside, "I have come for guidance. I do not know which path to take. My life feels scattered, my work, my relationships, even my dreams. I thought if anyone could help me find direction, it would be you." Arthur smiled kindly, gesturing for Clara to sit by the fire. He poured her a cup of tea, fragrant with chamomile and honey, and listened as she poured out her worries. The choices that weighed on her, the uncertainty that clouded her days, the fear of making the wrong turn and never finding her way back. When she finished, Arthur reached for an old compass, its brass casing worn smooth by years of use. He placed it in Clara's palm, watching as she traced the delicate needle with her fingertip. "This compass has traveled with me through many lands," he said softly. "It always points north, no matter where I stand. But there were times, Clara, when even with a compass, I felt utterly lost. I searched for certainty, for guarantees, for a map that would show me every twist and turn before I took a single step. But life does not give us such maps." He leaned closer, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "The Buddha taught,
You cannot travel the path until you have become the path itself. Sometimes we must walk forward without knowing what lies ahead. We must learn to trust the compass within our own hearts. Clara stared into the flames, her brow furrowed. But what if I choose wrongly? What if I lose myself? Arthur nodded, understanding the ache behind her words. We all fear losing our way. But consider this. A map shows only one version of the world. It cannot tell you about the scent of pine in the forest, the sound of laughter in a village square, or the kindness of strangers met along the road. If you cling too tightly to the map, you may miss the beauty that unfolds when you allow yourself to wander. He rose and crossed the room, retrieving a faded parchment from a drawer. Unrolling it on the table, he revealed a map unlike any other. Its lines twisted and tangled, looping back upon themselves, dotted with question marks and tiny painted lanterns. This is the map of my own journey, Arthur explained. Every detour, every mistake, every moment of doubt is here. And yet, each one led me somewhere unexpected, somewhere necessary. The compass did not erase my uncertainty, but it reminded me to return, again and again, to my true north, the values and intentions that matter most. Clara traced the map with her finger, following the winding paths. For the first time, she saw that getting lost was not a failure, but a part of the journey. Elias, the wise monk who sometimes visited the town, once told Arthur, "The present moment is your compass. When you are anxious about the future or haunted by the past, you lose your way. But when you breathe deeply and listen to your heart, you find your direction, step by step." Arthur turned to Clara. In modern life, we are taught to seek certainty, to plan, predict, control. But life is full of unknowns. Anxiety grows when we demand guarantees that the world cannot give. True peace comes from accepting uncertainty, from trusting ourselves to navigate whatever arises. He invited Clara to close her eyes and place her hand over her heart. Together, they sat in silence, listening to the rain, feeling the warmth of the fire. Arthur guided her to notice her breath, the steady beat of her heart, the quiet wisdom that lived beneath her doubts. "Ask yourself," he whispered, "what is my true north? What values guide me, even when the path is unclear? Can I trust myself to take one step at a time, to adjust my course as I go?" Clara breathed in, then out, letting the questions settle like leaves on water. She felt the tension in her shoulders ease, the frantic swirl of thoughts slow to a gentle current. When she opened her eyes, Arthur pressed the compass into her hand. "Take this," he said. "Let it remind you that you are never truly lost. Even when the way is hidden, your heart knows how to find the next step." Clara smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Arthur. I think I understand now. The map is not the journey. The compass is not the destination. I must learn to trust the path as it unfolds." Arthur watched her leave, her figure framed by the golden light spilling from the doorway. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the air was fresh with promise. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed, marking the hour, a reminder that time moves forward whether we are ready or not. As night deepened, Arthur sat by the fire, reflecting on his own journey. He remembered the times he had felt lost, the nights spent staring at maps, searching for answers that would not come. He realized that the greatest wisdom he had gained was not from the maps he drew, but from the courage to keep walking, even when the way was uncertain. For those listening tonight, perhaps you too have felt lost, adrift in the sea of choices, burdened by the need for certainty. Notice how your body responds, the tightening in your chest, the restless energy in your limbs, the urge to grasp for answers. These are natural human reactions. You are not alone. What if, instead of demanding a perfect map, you trusted your inner compass? What if you allowed yourself to take one mindful step at a time, to welcome the unknown as a companion rather than an enemy? The Buddha reminds us, there is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path. Peace is not found in having all the answers, but embracing the journey moment by moment. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, invite yourself to let go of the need for certainty. Feel the support of your bed, the softness of your breath. Imagine holding a compass in your hand, its needle pointing gently toward your true north. Trust that you will find your way, even if the path is hidden. Before you drift into dreams, ask yourself, what is my true north? How can I honor my journey, even when I feel lost? What beauty might I discover if I trust the unfolding of my own path? If this story has touched your heart, please share your reflections below. What journeys have shaped you? How do you find your way when the map runs out? Like, comment, and subscribe to join our circle of healing stories. May you sleep peacefully, guided by the quiet wisdom of your own heart. Story 24. The Bread Baker's Dawn. In the gentle cradle of a small European town, where morning mist curled around red-tiled roofs and the river ran slow and silver, there stood a bakery whose windows glowed long before sunrise. It was here, in this fragrant haven, that Margaret began her day, her hands already dusted with flour as the rest of the world still slumbered. Margaret was known to all as the bread baker.
Her loaves were legendary. Golden crusts, soft crumb, the scent of rosemary or rye drifting through cobbled streets, drawing people from their beds like a quiet promise. But few knew the true story behind Margaret's dawn ritual, or the silent battles she fought each morning before the first loaf rose. For Margaret, baking was more than craft. It was meditation, an act of healing born from years of sorrow and uncertainty. There had been a time when grief had threatened to swallow her whole. The loss of her husband, the sudden emptiness of her home, the way her heart seemed to echo with longing every time the church bell tolled. In those early days, she found herself wandering the house at night, unable to sleep, her mind restless with questions that had no answers. One sleepless morning, Margaret remembered her grandmother's words. "When you are lost, bake bread. Let your hands remember what your heart forgets." So she rose in darkness, lit a single candle, and began to knead dough by hand. The rhythm soothed her. With each fold and press, she felt her breath slow, her thoughts settle. The simple alchemy of flour, water, salt, and yeast became a prayer, a way to bring warmth back into her life, one loaf at a time. As months passed, Margaret's kitchen became a sanctuary not just for herself, but for others. Neighbors would come, drawn by the aroma, seeking comfort for their own troubles. She listened as they spoke of lost jobs, sick children, broken dreams. She offered them bread, and in doing so, offered presence, a reminder that even in pain, there could be nourishment and connection. One cold morning, as snow fell softly outside, a young man named Thomas arrived at Margaret's door. He was new to the village, his eyes clouded with fatigue and worry. He confessed he'd lost his job in the city, that he'd come to the countryside hoping to find peace, but instead felt more adrift than ever. "I wake before dawn," Thomas admitted, "but I can't seem to find purpose. My mind races with regrets and fears about the future. I don't know how to begin again." Margaret smiled gently, handing him a warm roll fresh from the oven. "Sometimes," she said, "the only way forward is to return to the simplest things. Would you like to help me bake?" Thomas hesitated, then nodded. Together, they measured flour, poured water, sprinkled salt. Margaret showed him how to knead, how to feel the dough yield and strengthen beneath his palms.
As they worked, she shared her own story, not as a lesson, but as a companion on the journey through darkness. The Buddha taught, Margaret said quietly, each morning we are born again. What we do today is what matters most. When I lost my way, I learned to greet each dawn as a new beginning, not with grand plans, but with small acts of care, kneading dough, lighting a candle, sharing bread.
These rituals remind me that healing happens slowly, in ordinary moments. Thomas listened, the tension in his shoulders easing as the dough grew smooth and elastic. He noticed the warmth of the kitchen, the steady sound of rain against the window, the way his breath matched the rhythm of his hands. For the first time in weeks, he felt present, anchored in the now, rather than lost in memories or worries. Margaret placed the shaped loaves in the oven, inviting Thomas to sit by the fire while they baked. She poured tea, fragrant with mint and lemon balm, and together they watched the flames dance. In our modern lives, Margaret reflected, we are often told to chase happiness, to achieve, to fix, to control. But real peace comes from accepting the ordinary, from finding beauty in what is right before us. When we focus only on what's missing, we overlook the gifts of the present moment. She looked at Thomas, her gaze kind and steady. Grief, anxiety, exhaustion, they visit us all. But when we meet them with patience, with gentle attention, we discover resilience we never knew we had. Like bread rising in the dark, hope grows quietly, almost invisibly, until one day it fills the room with light. The timer chimed, and Margaret pulled the loaves from the oven. The crusts crackled, releasing a cloud of steam scented with rosemary and olive oil. She broke a loaf in half, offering Thomas a piece. "Eat," she said simply. "Let yourself be nourished." Thomas took a bite, savoring the warmth, the softness, the subtle salt. Tears welled in his eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. In that moment, he understood that healing did not require dramatic change, only the willingness to begin again, one small step at a time. Margaret smiled, her own heart lighter. Every dawn is a chance to start anew. You don't have to have all the answers. Just show up, breathe, and do the next kind thing, for yourself, for others. This is enough. As the sun climbed higher, painting the snow with gold, Thomas thanked Margaret and stepped out into the brightening day. The world seemed softer, less daunting. He carried with him not just bread, but a sense of possibility, a belief that even in uncertainty, there could be meaning and joy. For those listening tonight, perhaps you too have known sleepless nights, the ache of loss, the weight of uncertainty. Notice how your body feels, the heaviness in your chest, the restlessness in your limbs, the longing for comfort. These are natural human responses. You are not alone. What if, instead of searching for grand solutions, you return to the simple rituals that ground you? What if you allowed yourself to begin again each morning, to find solace in small acts of care? The Buddha reminds us, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Healing is not a destination, but a practice, a way of meeting each moment with gentleness and presence. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, invite yourself to let go of expectations. Feel the support of your bed, the softness of your breath. Imagine the scent of fresh bread filling your room, reminding you that comfort is always close at hand. Before you drift into dreams, ask yourself, what small kindness can I offer myself tomorrow? How might I nourish my spirit, even in uncertainty? Can I trust that, like bread rising in the dark, hope will find its way to me? Story 25. The Sanctuary of Shadows. In the heart of an old American city, where narrow streets twisted between brick buildings and the glow of street lamps painted gold on wet pavement, there stood a church long forgotten by most. Its doors were heavy oak,
its stained glass windows dusted with time, and in the hush of midnight, it became a sanctuary for those who wandered through the darkness, lost souls seeking shelter from storms both seen and unseen. It was here that Father Samuel, a man whose hair had turned silver at the temples and whose eyes held the softness of someone who had known both sorrow and grace, tended to the silence. He was not a preacher of many words. Instead, he listened, his presence as steady as the candlelight flickering in the nave. Each night, when the city's noise faded into distant echoes, Samuel would walk the aisles, pausing at each pew to offer a silent blessing for whoever might sit there next. One winter evening, as snow drifted against the stained glass and the wind sang through the bell tower, a young woman named Evelyn slipped quietly inside. Her coat was thin, her cheeks flushed with cold, and her eyes darted nervously toward the shadows pooling in the corners of the sanctuary. She chose a seat near the back, curling into herself as if trying to disappear. Samuel noticed her arrival but did not approach immediately. Instead, he lit another candle, letting its warmth push gently against the darkness. After some time, he walked softly down the aisle and sat a few pews away, leaving space for Evelyn's solitude. They sat together in silence, broken only by the faint creak of wood and the sigh of wind. Eventually, Evelyn spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I can't sleep," she said. "Every night the shadows seem to grow larger. My mind fills with regrets, things I've done, things I've lost. I feel like I'm drowning in memories I can't escape." Samuel nodded, his gaze gentle. "The night has a way of magnifying what we try to hide during the day. But you are not alone in this darkness. All of us carry shadows." Evelyn looked up, searching his face for judgment, but found only compassion. "I thought coming here might help," she admitted, "but sometimes the silence is even louder than the noise outside." Samuel smiled softly. "Silence can be frightening, yes. It asks us to listen, to ourselves, to our pain, to the questions we have buried. But it can also be a doorway. The Buddha once said, 'Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without.' Sometimes we must enter the sanctuary of our own shadows to find the light waiting there." He gestured toward the altar, where dozens of candles burned in quiet defiance of the night. "Do you see how each flame casts a shadow? Without darkness, we would never notice the beauty of the light." Evelyn watched the dance of shadows and fire, her breath slowing as she let the image settle in her mind. "In my own life," Samuel continued, "I have faced nights filled with regret and fear. There were times I tried to outrun my shadows, busying myself with work, distracting myself with noise. But they always returned, asking to be seen, to be understood. Only when I learned to sit with them, to listen without judgment, did I begin to heal." He paused, letting the stillness stretch between them. In modern life, we are taught to fear the dark, to fill every moment with distraction, to avoid discomfort at all costs. But healing does not come from running away. It comes from turning toward our pain, from making space for our sadness, our anger, our longing. When we do this with kindness, we discover that our shadows are not enemies, but teachers. Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her grief settle in her chest. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe into it, to notice its shape and texture. It was heavy, yes, but not endless. Beneath the ache, she sensed something softer, a longing for forgiveness, for acceptance, for peace. Samuel guided her in a simple meditation. With each inhale, imagine drawing in the warmth of the candles, their light, their hope. With each exhale, allow your shadows to soften, to become less threatening. You do not need to fix or change anything right now. Just be present, just breathe. They sat together, the minutes unfolding like petals. Outside, the snow fell heavier, muffling the city's edges, wrapping the church in a cocoon of quiet. After a while, Evelyn opened her eyes. The sanctuary felt different, less like a place of exile, more like a refuge. She looked at Samuel, gratitude shining through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not turning away." Samuel shook his head gently. "We all need a place where our shadows are welcome. Healing begins when we stop hiding from ourselves." He offered her a small card, printed with words from the Dhammapada. "Just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life." He added, "Your spirit is strong, Evelyn. Even in darkness, you are never truly alone." As dawn approached, the sky behind the stained glass began to pale. Evelyn stood, her posture less burdened, her steps lighter. She pressed her hand to her heart, feeling the steady beat that had carried her through another night. She left the sanctuary, stepping into the new day. The world outside was blanketed in white, fresh and unmarked, a reminder that every morning offers a chance to begin again. For those listening tonight, perhaps you too know the weight of shadows, the regrets that haunt you, the fears that visit in the quiet hours. Notice how your body responds, the tightness in your chest, the urge to distract or run. These are natural, human reactions. You are not alone. What if, instead of fleeing your shadows, you welcomed them? What if you allowed yourself to sit in silence, to listen kindly to your pain? In doing so, you may discover that your shadows hold wisdom, that beneath the sorrow, there is a longing for wholeness, for peace. The Buddha reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Tonight, let your word be acceptance. Let your practice be presence. As you prepare for sleep, invite your shadows to rest beside you. Feel the support of your bed, the softness of your breath. Imagine the gentle glow of candlelight illuminating even the darkest corners of your heart. Before you drift into dreams, ask yourself, what part of me needs compassion tonight? How might I make space for my shadows, rather than pushing them away? Can I trust that in welcoming all of myself, I will find healing? If this story has touched your heart, please share your reflections below. What shadows have you befriended? How do you find sanctuary in the darkness? Like, comment, and subscribe to join our circle of healing stories. May you sleep peacefully, knowing that even in shadow, you are held in light. As our journey together drifts to a gentle close, I invite you to linger in this quiet space a little longer. What thoughts or feelings have these stories stirred within you? Which moments spoke softly to your heart or offered you comfort in the shadows? Your reflections are precious, each one a ripple that enriches our shared waters. If you feel moved, please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I would love to hear how Elias's stories touch your life and what wisdom or peace you carry with you as you step back into the world. Your voice may be the lantern that lights another traveler's way. If these tales have brought you solace, insight, or simply a moment of stillness, I warmly encourage you to like this video and subscribe to The Empty Boat. By joining our growing circle, you help keep this sanctuary afloat, ensuring that more hearts can find rest and healing here night after night. Thank you for being part of this journey. May you return whenever you need calm, inspiration, or gentle company on the river of life. Until we meet again, may your path be peaceful, your heart light, and your boat always guided by kindness.